The confused elderly woman my son and his wife abandoned at Newark Airport, with a canceled flight and no way home, had just liquidated their entire $180,000 family vacation fund and transferred their first-class European honeymoon tickets to a charity auction, and Daniel was about to discover that the mother he'd dismissed as hopeless with travel technology had actually spent 35 years as one of the most senior travel industry executives in the Northeast, with connections that could make or break any vacation plans from here to Tokyo. Before we dive into this story, let me know in the comments, what's the worst travel experience you've ever had with family? And if this hits close to home, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's part will reveal exactly how my daughter-in-law's perfect family getaway was actually a systematic plan to exclude me while using my money to fund their luxury lifestyle. My name is Eleanor Catherine Walsh, and at 70 years old, I thought I understood my place in my family's complicated dynamics. I lived in a comfortable two-bedroom condo in Stamford, Connecticut, a place I'd bought 15 years ago when I retired from my executive position and wanted to downsize from the large family home where I'd raised my son Daniel as a single mother after my husband Robert died in a car accident when Daniel was just 8 years old. My condo had a beautiful view of Long Island Sound, a small but efficient kitchen where I enjoyed cooking elaborate meals for family visits, and a home office that most people assumed I used for managing my retirement paperwork and staying in touch with old friends through email. What my family didn't realize was that the office contained a sophisticated communication and booking system that connected me to travel networks spanning 6 continents with access to airline partnerships, hotel chains, and vacation planning, resources that most people could only dream of accessing. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Daniel was my only child, born when I was 35 after several miscarriages that had left Robert and me devastated, but even more grateful when Daniel finally arrived healthy and perfect. After Robert's death, I threw myself into both my career and single parenthood, with the kind of fierce determination that had helped me climb from entry-level travel agent to senior vice president of global operations at Premier Travel Consortium, one of the largest luxury travel companies on the East Coast. Working in the travel industry in the 1980s and 90s wasn't easy for a single mother. I spent countless hours coordinating international business trips for Fortune 500 executives, managing crisis situations when flights were canceled or hotels overbooked, and building relationships with airline executives, hotel managers, and tour operators across the globe. But I was good at it, really good, and I was determined to provide Daniel with every opportunity and advantage I could manage on my executive salary. When Daniel was 12, I was promoted to Regional Director of Corporate Travel Services, which meant managing a team of 47 travel specialists and overseeing accounts worth over $120 million annually. By the time he was in high school, I was coordinating emergency evacuations for multinational corporations during political crises, arranging last-minute diplomatic travel for government officials, and negotiating directly with airline CEOs when major weather events threatened to strand hundreds of high-priority travelers. Remember one particularly challenging week in 1998 when a volcanic eruption in Ecuador had disrupted air traffic across South America, stranding nearly 200 corporate executives from various premier travel clients. I spent 72 hours straight on the phone with contacts in 12 different countries, calling in favors, rerouting flights, and coordinating ground transportation that ultimately got every single client home safely. The CEO of Premier Travel personally thanked me in front of the entire executive board, saying I had saved the company from millions of dollars in liability and reputation damage. But when I tried to share this story with Daniel over dinner that week, he smiled politely and said, "That's nice, Mom. It sounds like you had a busy few days at work." He was 17 at the time, more interested in his upcoming SATs and college applications than understanding the complexities of international crisis management in the travel industry. By the time I retired at 65 in 2018, I was making $280,000 a year, had accumulated a pension that would support me comfortably for the rest of my life, and had developed professional relationships in the travel industry that opened doors most people didn't even know existed. I had personally arranged travel for 3 U.S. senators, coordinated logistics for international business summits, and maintained active partnerships with luxury resorts and airlines that gave me access to inventory and upgrades that weren't available through normal booking channels. My retirement party was attended by over 150 industry professionals, including the CEOs of 2 major cruise lines, the regional directors of 4 international airlines, and representatives from luxury hotel chains across 3 continents. The gifts and recognition I received that evening reflected 35 years of building trust and delivering exceptional results in one of the most demanding and relationship-dependent industries in the world. But Daniel never really understood what I did for work. When he was growing up, I'd tell him I helped people plan vacations, and he'd nod politely before returning to his homework or friends. As he got older and became more focused on his own career in pharmaceutical sales, he seemed to assume that my job had been something like a basic travel agent, booking simple trips and printing out itineraries, the kind of work that required organization but not any special expertise or industry knowledge. The disconnect between my actual professional accomplishments and Daniel's perception of my career became even more pronounced after I retired. During family visits, he would see me struggling to use new airline apps on my phone or asking him to help me understand changes to frequent flyer programs, and he'd smile patiently while explaining things in the slow, careful voice people use. With elderly relatives they assume aren't keeping up with modern life. What he didn't realize was that I was perfectly capable of coordinating multi-country business trips for international executives, but genuinely frustrated by the deliberately confusing interfaces that budget airlines and online booking sites seem to design specifically to extract extra fees from customers who couldn't navigate their intentionally complicated systems. There's a big difference between not understanding travel logistics and not understanding predatory website design, but Daniel had never bothered to learn the difference. The irony was that while Daniel saw me struggling with consumer travel apps, I was simultaneously maintaining my professional consulting relationships with Premier Travel Consortium, where I continued to coordinate complex international travel for their most demanding corporate clients. The company retained me on a $75,000 annual consulting contract, specifically because my industry relationships and crisis management expertise were too valuable to lose entirely when I retired. Just 6 months before the incident that would change everything, I had coordinated emergency travel arrangements for a pharmaceutical company's executive team when a factory explosion in India required immediate on-site crisis management. I arranged private jets, security escorts, medical support, and accommodations in a region where normal commercial travel had been suspended due to civil unrest. The entire operation required calling in favors from contacts across 4 different industries and 2 government agencies, and it was completed successfully within 18 hours of the initial emergency call. When I mentioned this project to Daniel during one of our weekly phone calls, he responded with, "That's great, Mom. I'm glad you're staying busy with some consulting work. It's important for seniors to have projects that keep them engaged." Staying busy with consulting work. As if coordinating international crisis response was a hobby to keep me mentally active rather than professional expertise that companies were willing to pay significant money to access. 2 years ago, Daniel married Sophia Martinez, a 31-year-old marketing coordinator who had recently left her corporate position at a mid-sized advertising agency to start her own luxury lifestyle consulting business. Sophia was undeniably stunning, petite, with glossy dark hair and the kind of effortless elegance that looked natural, but probably required significant time and money to maintain. She had a warm smile, an engaging personality, and a social media presence that showcased her sophisticated taste in everything from interior design to international cuisine. Daniel was completely captivated by Sophia from the moment they met at a pharmaceutical industry conference in Boston, where she was managing corporate hospitality for one of his company's biggest clients. He'd always been attracted to women who were more worldly and confident than he was, and Sophia's apparent expertise in luxury experiences and high-end lifestyle management seemed to represent everything he wished he could access, but felt too conservative to pursue on his own. Sophia had grown up in an affluent family in Westchester County, attended private schools, and had spent summers traveling throughout Europe and South America with her parents, who owned a successful import business. She spoke fluent Spanish and conversational French, had lived in Barcelona for 6 months during college, and possessed the kind of international sophistication that Daniel found both attractive and slightly intimidating. When they announced their engagement after dating, for 10 months, I was cautiously optimistic. Sophia seemed to make Daniel genuinely happy, and she was always perfectly polite to me during family gatherings. She called me Eleanor, rather than any variation of Mom, which felt formal but wasn't necessarily problematic. She complimented my cooking, asked thoughtful questions about my retirement activities, and seemed genuinely interested in building a positive relationship with me. Eleanor, Daniel has told me so much about how you supported him throughout his education and early career, Sophia had said during one of her first visits to my condo. It must have been incredibly challenging to manage such a demanding career while raising a child as a single mother. That takes tremendous strength and determination. I was immediately charmed by her apparent understanding of the sacrifices I had made and the challenges I had overcome. Most of Daniel's previous girlfriends had been polite, but disinterested when it came to learning about my life or acknowledging the role I had played in Daniel's success. Sophia seemed different, more mature, more appreciative, more aware of family dynamics and the importance of building positive relationships with in-laws. I hope you'll feel comfortable giving me advice about marriage and family, Sophia had continued. I know Daniel values your opinion tremendously, and I'd love to learn from your experience and wisdom. These early conversations made me feel valued and included in their relationship in ways I'd never experienced with Daniel's previous relationships. Sophia seemed to genuinely want my guidance and insight, treating me like a respected mentor, rather than an obligation to be managed. But what I didn't realize at the time was that these conversations were intelligence-gathering missions designed to help Sophia understand the dynamics of our family so she could eventually manipulate them to her advantage. Every detail I shared about my career, every story I told about my industry connections, every piece of information I provided about my financial resources, all of it was being cataloged and analyzed to help Sophia position herself as the perfect daughter-in-law who understood exactly how to access the benefits of having a travel industry executive in the family. The first major test of our relationship came when Daniel and Sophia were planning their honeymoon. They had been discussing various European destinations during their engagement, but they were struggling with the complexity and cost of planning a 3-week luxury trip that would include multiple countries, high-end accommodations, and first-class transportation throughout their journey. Eleanor, you used to work in travel, didn't you? Sophia had asked during one of our family dinners about 2 months before their wedding. We're trying to plan this amazing European honeymoon, but everything is so expensive and complicated. Do you think you could give us some advice about how to find good deals? I was immediately eager to help. This was exactly the kind of complex international travel planning that I had specialized in throughout my career, and I was excited to use my expertise and industry connections to help Daniel and Sophia create the honeymoon of their dreams. I'd be more than happy to help you plan your honeymoon, I told them. In fact, let me see what I can do about getting you some upgrades and special arrangements. I still have contacts throughout the industry who might be able to make your trip extra special. That would be incredible, Sophia had exclaimed, her eyes lighting up with genuine excitement. We want this to be the trip of a lifetime, but we're just not sure how to access the kind of luxury experiences we're dreaming about. We've been looking at basic hotel rooms and economy flights, but everything feels so ordinary for such a special occasion. What kind of experiences are you hoping to have? I asked, already mentally reviewing my contact lists and thinking about which favors I could call in to create something truly memorable for them. Well, Sophia said, pulling out her phone to show me a Pinterest board she had created, we'd love to stay in luxury hotels in Paris, Rome, and Barcelona. We're dreaming about first-class flights, private tours of places like the Vatican and the Louvre, dinner reservations at Michelin-starred restaurants, maybe even a private wine tasting in Tuscany. I looked at her Pinterest board, which showcased exactly the kind of ultra-luxury travel experiences that my corporate clients had enjoyed throughout my career. The hotels she had selected were properties where I had maintained relationships for over 20 years. The restaurants she wanted to visit were establishments where I had secured last-minute reservations for Fortune 500 CEOs. The private tours and exclusive experiences she was dreaming about were exactly the kind of arrangements I had coordinated hundreds of times for clients who were willing to pay premium prices for access and service that weren't available through normal booking channels. This is definitely achievable, I told them. Give me a few weeks to make some calls and see what I can arrange. Over the following month, I threw myself into planning Daniel and Sophia's honeymoon with the same professional intensity I had brought to coordinating travel for my most demanding corporate clients. I started by calling my contact at Lufthansa's corporate sales division, someone I had worked with for over 15 years on high-priority business travel. Within 2 hours, I had secured first-class seats on their preferred travel dates, along with access to the airline's premium lounges and priority service throughout their journey. Next, I contacted my relationships at luxury hotel chains across Europe. The general manager of the Hotel Plaza Athénée in Paris was someone I had worked with extensively during my years coordinating diplomatic travel, and he immediately offered Daniel and Sophia a suite upgrade and complimentary services that would have cost thousands of dollars if purchased separately. Similar conversations with contacts in Rome and Barcelona resulted in premium accommodations and exclusive amenities at properties that were typically booked months in advance. The private tours and restaurant reservations required calling in favors from local tourism contacts I had developed over decades of arranging specialized experiences for high-net-worth clients. I secured private after-hours access to the Vatican museums, a guided tour of the Louvre with a curator who normally worked only with museum benefactors, and dinner reservations at 3 Michelin-starred restaurants that had multi-month waiting lists. The total retail value of the trip I arranged was approximately $65,000, but through my industry relationships and accumulated favors, I was able to provide everything for about $22,000 in actual costs. I covered the entire amount as my wedding gift to them, believing that giving them this incredible experience was the perfect way to start their marriage and demonstrate my support for their relationship. "Eleanor, this is absolutely amazing," Daniel had said when I presented them with the complete itinerary and confirmed bookings. "I had no idea you could arrange anything like this. You've basically given us the honeymoon that celebrities probably take. Your mother is a miracle worker," Sophia had added, giving me a hug that felt warm and genuine. "I can't believe you were able to get us into places that are usually impossible to book. This is going to be the most incredible 3 weeks of our lives." I felt wonderful about being able to provide such a meaningful contribution to their honeymoon, and I looked forward to hearing about their adventures when they returned. The thank you card they sent from Paris during their trip included photos of their suite at the Plaza Athénée and a note saying, "Eleanor, we're living like royalty. Thanks to your incredible connections. We'll never forget how you made our dreams come true." What I didn't anticipate was how quickly that gesture of generosity would be reframed as something I owed them, rather than something I had chosen to give them. Within 6 months of their return from Europe, Sophia had undergone a remarkable professional transformation. Her luxury lifestyle consulting business, which had been relatively modest before their marriage, suddenly became much more sophisticated and expensive. Her social media presence began showcasing high-end travel experiences, exclusive restaurant recommendations, and luxury lifestyle content that positioned her as someone with insider access to premium experiences. More significantly, she started offering travel planning services to her network of friends and professional contacts, positioning herself as someone who had access to industry connections and insider knowledge that could secure upgrades and special arrangements that weren't available through normal booking channels. "I've been getting so many requests for travel planning help," Sophia mentioned during a family dinner about 8 months after their honeymoon. "People saw our honeymoon photos and want to know how we accessed such exclusive experiences. I'm thinking about expanding my consulting business to include luxury travel coordination." "That sounds like a wonderful opportunity," I replied, genuinely pleased that their honeymoon had been inspiring to their friends and might lead to business growth for Sophia. What I didn't realize at the time was that Sophia was essentially selling my expertise and connections as her own business model. She was using the success of their honeymoon, which had been entirely arranged through my industry relationships, as evidence of her own capabilities and access, while never mentioning to her potential clients that all of her insider connections actually came from her mother-in-law's 3 decades of professional relationships in the travel industry. Over the following year, Sophia's travel consulting business grew significantly. She was charging clients between $5,000 and $15,000 to coordinate luxury travel experiences, and her social media content regularly featured testimonials from satisfied customers who praised her ability to secure upgrades, exclusive access, and special arrangements that they couldn't obtain through normal booking methods. But what I began to notice was that many of these successful client experiences seemed to coincide with requests for my assistance with various family projects. That required my industry expertise. "Eleanor, would you mind helping us coordinate a weekend getaway for my birthday?" Daniel would call to ask. "Sophia's been working so hard on her business, and I want to surprise her with something really special." Or, "Eleanor, Sophia has a potential client who wants to visit Napa Valley, and she's asked if you might have any contacts who could arrange some exclusive wine tastings. It would really help her business if she could offer something unique." Each of these requests seemed reasonable on the surface. Family members asking for help with special occasions or business networking opportunities. But gradually, I began to realize that my assistance with these family projects was actually providing the foundation for Sophia's professional success as a luxury travel consultant. The exclusive wine tastings I arranged for her potential client became part of a $12,000 Napa Valley luxury package that Sophia sold to 3 different customers. The special birthday weekend I coordinated for Daniel became a template that Sophia used to offer similar experiences to her paying clients. The restaurant reservations, hotel upgrades, and exclusive access arrangements I secured for various family occasions were all being studied, documented, and replicated as part of Sophia's business model. I was essentially functioning as the unpaid travel industry expert who made Sophia's luxury consulting business possible, while she received all the credit and financial benefit for services that were only achievable through my professional relationships and accumulated industry favors. But the most troubling aspect of this arrangement was that Sophia never acknowledged my contributions or offered to compensate me for the value I was providing to her business. Instead, she presented each request as a family favor or special occasion assistance, while simultaneously building a profitable business model that relied entirely on my expertise and connections. As Sophia's business grew more successful, Daniel and Sophia began proposing more frequent and elaborate family bonding experiences that always seemed to require my travel expertise and often my financial support as well. These trips were presented as opportunities for us to spend quality time together while creating memories that would strengthen our family relationships. "Eleanor, we want to plan a really special weekend getaway for your birthday," Sophia had called to tell me about 10 months after their honeymoon. "We were thinking about somewhere like Martha's Vineyard or Newport, somewhere elegant where we can really celebrate you properly and have some quality family time." I was touched by their thoughtfulness and immediately began researching options for a luxury weekend that would be memorable for all of us. Using my connections with New England luxury resorts, I secured a 3-bedroom suite at an exclusive property in Martha's Vineyard, arranged for private wine tastings at 2 boutique, vineyards, and coordinated transportation and dining reservations that would make the weekend truly special. "This is going to cost about $6,500 for the three of us," I told them when I had everything arranged. "I'm happy to cover it as a way to celebrate with you both." "Eleanor, you're so generous," Sophia had replied. "We feel terrible that you're paying for your own birthday celebration, but we just don't have the budget for anything this nice right now. Sophia's business is growing, but we're reinvesting everything back into building her client base." The weekend was lovely. Beautiful accommodations, incredible food, and quality time with Daniel and Sophia in a relaxed, luxurious setting. But what bothered me was realizing that I was functioning more as the travel coordinator and financial backer than as the celebrated birthday guest. Daniel and Sophia spent much of the weekend taking photos for Sophia's social media content, discussing her business opportunities, and planning future client experiences based on the arrangements I had made for our family trip. When we returned home, Sophia posted extensive content about our weekend, presenting it as an example of the kind of exclusive New England luxury experiences she could arrange for clients. The photos showcased the suite I had secured, the private tastings I had arranged, and the restaurant reservations I had coordinated, while the captions positioned Sophia as the lifestyle expert who had access to these premium experiences. Over the following year, these family bonding experiences became more frequent, more expensive, and more demanding in terms of the planning and coordination required. What had started as a birthday weekend had evolved into regular luxury trips that always seemed to require my travel industry connections and financial contributions. A long weekend in Miami for Daniel's birthday that required my contacts to secure ocean view suites during Art Basel Week, when hotel availability was virtually non-existent and rates were at their annual peak. A Christmas vacation in Aspen that needed my relationships with luxury ski resorts to arrange slopeside accommodations during peak season, along with private ski instruction and exclusive dining reservations. A spring break trip to the Caribbean that required my cruise industry connections to upgrade them to balcony suites and secure specialty dining reservations on a luxury cruise line. Each trip cost between $8,000 and $15,000, and each trip was presented as an opportunity for family bonding that they couldn't afford to arrange themselves, but desperately wanted to experience with me. I was providing both the expertise to make luxury travel possible and the funding to make it financially feasible, while Daniel and Sophia positioned themselves as the loving family members who valued quality time together. But gradually, I began to notice that my role in these trips was evolving from celebrated family member to facilitating coordinator. Daniel and Sophia would spend most of their time during these vacations taking photos for Sophia's social media content, exploring destinations independently while I rested at the hotel, and planning activities that interested them rather than considering what I might enjoy doing. During our Aspen Christmas vacation, I spent 2 full days alone in the hotel suite while Daniel and Sophia went skiing, attended après-ski events, and met with local contacts who might become future clients for Sophia's business. When I suggested that we might spend some time together as a family, Daniel explained that they were networking for business opportunities and that I should relax and enjoy the luxury accommodations I had arranged and funded. Was financing and arranging luxury vacations where I was increasingly functioning as the travel coordinator and financial backer rather than the beloved family member these trips were supposedly designed to celebrate and include. The pattern became completely clear during what would be our final family trip together, a long weekend in Charleston that I had arranged and funded for Mother's Day. The trip cost $11,000 and included a historic district hotel suite, private tours of plantation gardens, and dinner reservations at the city's most exclusive restaurants. During the entire 4-day weekend, Daniel and Sophia spent approximately 6 hours in my actual company. The rest of their time was devoted to photographing Charleston's historic locations for Sophia's social media content, meeting with a potential client who happened to be vacationing in Charleston the same weekend, and exploring the city's restaurant and nightlife scene independently while I remained at the hotel. On Mother's Day itself, they left the hotel at 9 a.m. for a quick business breakfast, with Sophia's potential client and didn't return until 7 p.m., leaving me to spend Mother's Day alone in a hotel room in a city I had never visited, after having arranged and paid for. A trip that was supposedly designed to celebrate my importance to our family. When I gently mentioned that I had hoped we might spend Mother's Day together, Sophia explained that the business meeting had been an unexpected opportunity that could lead to a major client relationship, and that they thought I would understand the importance of taking advantage of professional opportunities when they arise. That evening, as I sat alone in the Charleston hotel suite I had arranged and funded, watching Daniel and Sophia post Instagram content about their amazing Mother's Day weekend exploring Charleston's hidden gems, I realized that our family dynamic had fundamentally changed in ways that I had been too generous and too hopeful to recognize. I was no longer Eleanor Walsh, the respected mother and accomplished travel industry professional who was valued for her wisdom and expertise. I had become Eleanor Walsh, the convenient travel coordinator and financial resource who could be utilized whenever Daniel and Sophia wanted to experience luxury travel that they couldn't afford or arrange themselves. But the incident that would change everything happened just 3 months later, when Daniel called with what would become the most audacious and expensive request of our entire relationship. "Mom, Sophia, and I have been invited to an incredible opportunity," Daniel had said during one of our weekly phone calls in late September. One of her clients is a pharmaceutical executive who wants to take a group of potential business partners on a luxury trip to Europe to discuss some major deals. He's invited us to join them, but it's next week, and we need help arranging the travel on short notice. Something about the timing and urgency of this request immediately triggered my professional instincts. In 35 years of coordinating business travel, I had learned that legitimate business opportunities rarely required last-minute luxury travel arrangements, and that reputable executives typically used established corporate travel systems, rather than asking business associates to coordinate their own arrangements. That sounds like an amazing opportunity for your career, sweetheart. What kind of help do you need? Well, the executive wants to travel first class and stay at the best hotels in London, Paris, and Rome. He's willing to pay for his own expenses, but he wants us to coordinate the entire trip for the group and cover our own costs as a way to demonstrate our commitment to the potential partnership. This explanation included several red flags that would have been immediately obvious to anyone with experience in legitimate business travel. Requiring participants to coordinate their own luxury travel arrangements was not standard practice for any reputable corporation. Asking potential business partners to cover their own significant travel costs as a demonstration of commitment was a tactic commonly used in business scams designed to extract money from victims who were eager to appear professional and committed. But my desire to support Daniel's career success overrode my professional instincts about requests that didn't make logical sense. How much would it cost for you and Sophia to participate? About $30,000 for both of us. But Mom, this could lead to business opportunities worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The problem is that we just don't have that kind of money available on short notice, and we don't have the industry connections to arrange everything at the level this executive expects. Daniel, I can help you with the arrangements, and I can lend you the money, but $30,000 is a significant amount. Are you absolutely certain this is a legitimate business opportunity? Mom, I promise this is real. Sophia has verified everything about this executive and his company. This is the kind of once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that could change our entire financial future. Against my better judgment, I agreed to arrange and fund their participation in this business opportunity. Over the next 48 hours, I used my industry connections to coordinate first-class flights on British Airways, luxury hotel suites at premier properties in London, Paris, and Rome, and exclusive experiences that would position them appropriately for high-level business. Networking Die also transferred $30,000 to Daniel's account to cover their expenses and participation costs, bringing the total value of my contribution to approximately $55,000 when combined with the luxury arrangements I had secured through my professional relationships. The trip was scheduled to depart on a Tuesday morning from Newark Airport. Daniel and Sophia had asked me to drive them to the airport because they wanted to start the trip with family support, and because they were concerned about leaving their car in long-term parking for a week-long international business trip. Agreed to provide transportation, planning to see them off and wish them well on what Daniel had described as a potentially life-changing business opportunity. But when we arrived at Newark Airport that Tuesday morning, I discovered that everything Daniel had told me about this trip was a lie. We arrived at Newark Airport at 10 a.m. for Daniel and Sophia's 1 p.m. departure to London. I had arranged for them to fly first class on British Airways, with hotel reservations at the Savoy in London, the Plaza Athénée in Paris, and the Hôtel de Russie in Rome. The total value of their week-long itinerary was approximately $55,000, covered entirely by my industry connections and the $30,000 I had transferred to fund their business opportunity. As we approached the first-class check-in counter, I noticed that Daniel and Sophia seemed unusually nervous, exchanging glances and speaking in whispers rather than exhibiting the excitement and professional confidence I would have expected from people embarking on an important business trip that could transform their career prospects. "Where should I meet you to check in with the business group?" I asked Daniel as we joined the first-class check-in line. Daniel and Sophia looked at each other with expressions I couldn't interpret, and then Sophia spoke up with what seemed like a rehearsed response. "Actually, Eleanor, there's been a change of plans. The business group is meeting directly at the gate, so you don't need to worry about coordinating with them here at check-in." In 35 years of coordinating business travel, I had never encountered a situation where a business group would meet at the gate rather than coordinating their check-in process, especially for international first-class travel that required specific documentation and coordination. Sophia's explanation felt rehearsed and inconsistent with standard business travel protocols. "What's the name of the pharmaceutical executive you're meeting? I'd like to introduce myself since I helped coordinate the travel arrangements, and I might be able to provide additional assistance if any issues arise during your trip." Daniel and Sophia exchanged another glance, and Daniel cleared his throat nervously before responding. "Mom, you don't need to worry about the business details. We've got everything handled from here, and we don't want to impose on the executives time with introductions that aren't necessary." That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Daniel and Sophia were checking in for only 2 passengers, not for a business group. There were no other travelers at the first-class counter who appeared to be part of their business party. There was no pharmaceutical executive coordinating group arrangements. "Daniel, who else is traveling with you today? Where is the rest of the business group?" Sophia answered before Daniel could respond, her voice taking on a slightly defensive tone that confirmed my growing suspicions. "Eleanor, the rest of the group is flying separately for security reasons. Different flights, different hotels, different itineraries. It's standard procedure for high-level business travel when you're dealing with confidential pharmaceutical negotiations. I had coordinated high-level business travel for pharmaceutical companies, Fortune 500 executives, and government officials for 35 years. There was nothing standard about any of what Sophia had just described, and everything about this situation was setting off alarm bells that I had learned to trust throughout my professional career. Legitimate business groups traveling for confidential negotiations typically coordinate their travel to ensure security and communication, rather than deliberately separating their logistics. The explanation Sophia was providing sounded like something from a movie rather than actual business travel protocol. "Daniel, I need you to tell me the truth about this trip. Right now." Daniel looked genuinely uncomfortable, but Sophia stepped forward with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes and spoke with the kind of forced cheerfulness that people use when they're trying to redirect uncomfortable conversations. "Eleanor, you're being a little paranoid. Everything is exactly as Daniel explained. We're meeting our business contacts in London, and then we'll be working throughout Europe for the rest of the week. You've done an amazing job arranging everything, and we're so grateful for your support. Then you won't mind if I wait with you at the gate to meet this pharmaceutical executive when he arrives for your business meeting." The silence that followed my suggestion told me everything I needed to know Daniel's face went pale, and Sophia's forced smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered her composure. "Mom," Daniel finally said, his voice taking on the patient, patronizing tone he used when he thought I was being unreasonable. "We really appreciate everything you've done, but we need to handle the business aspects of this trip ourselves. You should probably head home now so you don't have to worry about airport traffic later in the day." That's when I understood what was really happening. Daniel and Sophia had lied to me about the nature of this trip to extract $30,000 in luxury travel arrangements for what was actually a personal vacation. They had used my desire to support Daniel's career to manipulate me into funding and arranging a European holiday that they never intended to include me in or even acknowledge my role in making possible. They had executed a sophisticated con game against me, exploiting my trust, my professional expertise, and my financial resources while treating me like a mark rather than a family member. But what happened next was even worse than the deception itself. "Actually," Sophia said, checking her phone with exaggerated concern, "our departure time got moved up, so we need to get through security right away. Eleanor, thank you so much for the ride. We'll call you when we get to London." They started, walking toward the security checkpoint without another word, carrying the luggage for a luxury vacation I had arranged and funded, leaving me standing in the middle of Newark Airport with the sudden realization that my son and daughter-in-law had just stolen $30,000 from me while treating me like an inconvenient obstacle to their vacation plans. But when I called after them, "Daniel, wait. We need to talk about this." He turned around with an expression I had never seen on his face before, cold, annoyed, and completely dismissive. "Mom, please don't make a scene. We'll talk when we get back." And then they disappeared through security, leaving me alone in that airport terminal with the devastating understanding that the people I loved most in the world had just betrayed my trust in the most calculated and heartless way imaginable. I stood there for several minutes, processing what had just happened and trying to understand how my relationship with my son had deteriorated to the point where he was comfortable stealing from me while treating me like a nuisance who needed to be managed and dismissed. But what Daniel and Sophia didn't know, what they had never bothered to learn in all the years they had been dismissing my professional expertise and taking advantage of my generosity, was that the woman they had just abandoned at Newark Airport wasn't a confused elderly victim who would quietly absorb this betrayal and wait patiently for their return. I was Eleanor Catherine Walsh, former Senior Vice President of Global Operations for Premier Travel Consortium, with 35 years of experience in international travel management, industry connections spanning 6 continents, and professional relationships that could make luxury travel dreams come true for people who deserved them, and completely destroy travel plans for people who didn't. The son and daughter-in-law who thought they had successfully conned me out of $30,000 were about to discover that some mistakes are too expensive to survive, especially when you make them against someone who has spent decades learning exactly how to make travel plans disappear without a trace. As I stood in that airport terminal, watching their flight information on the departure board, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my most challenging crisis management cases during my corporate career. The cold, focused clarity that came with applying professional expertise to solve a problem that required immediate and decisive action. For 35 years, my job had been to make travel dreams come true for people who deserved exceptional experiences. But it had also been my job to protect clients from fraud, to investigate suspicious travel arrangements, and to implement consequences when people violated trust relationships or attempted to exploit the systems I managed. Daniel and Sophia had just made the catastrophic mistake of targeting someone whose professional expertise included not only creating luxury travel experiences, but also destroying them when circumstances required decisive action. The woman they left at Newark Airport was about to teach them exactly what happens when you steal from someone whose job was understanding every vulnerability in the international travel system and how to exploit those vulnerabilities when people needed to learn expensive lessons about the consequences of fraud and betrayal. As I walked back to my car, I was already mentally reviewing the comprehensive list of actions I could take to ensure that Daniel and Sophia's luxury European vacation would become the most expensive mistake of their lives. They thought they had outsmarted a helpless elderly woman who would quietly accept their theft and deception. They had actually just declared war on one of the most connected travel industry executives in the Northeast, who had spent decades building relationships specifically designed to handle situations exactly like this one. And unlike their European vacation, the education they were about to receive would be delivered immediately, comprehensively, and with the kind of professional efficiency that would ensure they never forgot what they had learned. Tomorrow, I'll tell you exactly how a 70-year-old confused grandmother made their $55,000 luxury vacation disappear into thin air, and why Daniel's pharmaceutical career was about to take a very expensive detour through unemployment and professional disgrace. But that's not even the best part of what happened next. Because what they didn't know was that every luxury arrangement I had made for their trip could be canceled, transferred, or sold with a single phone call to the right person, and I knew exactly who those people were. The woman they abandoned at the airport was about to become their most expensive nightmare, and it was going to start the moment their plane took off. Sophia entered our lives like a perfectly choreographed performance, and it took me nearly 3 years to realize that everything about her approach to our family was calculated to achieve maximum control with minimum accountability. When Daniel first introduced me to Sophia at a family barbecue in the summer of 2021, my immediate impression was overwhelmingly positive. She was 31 years old, strikingly beautiful in that effortless way that actually requires enormous effort, and she had the kind of warm, engaging personality that made everyone in the room want to be her friend. But what I didn't understand at the time was that Sophia's approach to meeting me had been carefully planned and strategically executed based on research she had already conducted about my background, my relationship with Daniel, and my potential value to her future plans. "Mrs. Walsh, Daniel has told me so much about you," she said, giving me a hug that felt genuine and warm. "He's so proud of everything you accomplished in the travel industry. It must have taken incredible strength and determination to build such a successful career while raising Daniel as a single mother." I was immediately charmed. Most of Daniel's previous girlfriends had been polite, but disinterested when it came to learning about my life or acknowledging the role I had played in Daniel's success. Sophia seemed different, more mature, more appreciative, more aware of family dynamics and the importance of building positive relationships with in-laws. "Daniel mentioned that you worked for one of the major travel companies," Sophia continued. "That must have been fascinating work. I imagine you got to help people, create incredible memories and experiences all over the world." What struck me about this conversation was how much Sophia already knew about my career, and how thoughtfully she had prepared questions that would encourage me to talk about my professional accomplishments in detail. Most people Daniel's age showed polite interest in older relatives' careers, but didn't ask follow-up questions that demonstrated genuine engagement with the subject matter. "I did love helping people plan special trips," I replied. "There's something wonderful about knowing you've helped create memories that families will treasure for decades." "I can only imagine the industry connections you must have developed over all those years," Sophia said. "The travel business seems like it's all about relationships and trust. You must know people at airlines and hotels all over the world." That comment should have been my first warning sign, though I didn't recognize it at the time. Sophia wasn't just making conversation about my career. She was conducting reconnaissance about my professional capabilities and resources. She was already thinking about how my industry relationships might benefit her, even though we had just met, and she had no legitimate reason to be interested in accessing my professional network. But in that moment, hearing Daniel's new girlfriend express genuine interest in my career accomplishments and acknowledge the challenges I had overcome, as a single mother I felt nothing but warmth and approval. Sophia seemed like exactly the kind of woman I'd always hoped Daniel would find. Someone who appreciated him, understood the importance of family relationships, and wanted to build connections rather than create distance between him and the people who loved him. Over the following months, Sophia made a concerted effort to build what appeared to be a genuine relationship with me. She would call me independently of Daniel, just to chat about her day, or ask for advice about dealing with work stress. She remembered details about my friends and activities, asking follow-up questions about my book club discussions or my volunteer work at the local animal shelter. "Eleanor, I hope you don't mind me calling you directly," she said during one of these early conversations. "But I wanted to ask your opinion about something. Daniel's been working such long hours lately, and I'm worried he's getting burned out. How did you help him manage stress when he was younger? What strategies worked best for keeping him motivated without pushing too hard?" These conversations made me feel valued and included in their relationship in ways I'd never experienced with Daniel's previous girlfriends. Sophia seemed to genuinely want my guidance and insight, treating me like a wise mentor rather than an obstacle to navigate around. But what I didn't realize was that these conversations were intelligence-gathering missions designed to help Sophia understand the dynamics of our family so she could eventually manipulate them to her advantage. Every detail I shared about Daniel's personality, every story I told about our family traditions, every piece of advice I offered about managing his moods and preferences, all of it was being cataloged and analyzed to help Sophia position herself as the perfect girlfriend who understood him better than anyone else ever had. When I told her that Daniel had always been motivated by recognition and appreciation for his hard work, she began making sure to praise his professional accomplishments in front of me during family gatherings. When I mentioned that Daniel valued family traditions and had always loved our Christmas morning rituals, Sophia began suggesting ways to enhance our holiday celebrations with special touches that would make them even more memorable. When I shared that Daniel sometimes felt insecure about his social skills and wished he could be more confident in professional networking situations, Sophia began positioning herself as the socially sophisticated partner who could help him access opportunities and experiences that would boost his confidence and career prospects. Sophia was using my own insights about my son to make herself indispensable to him, while simultaneously gathering information about our family dynamics that would help her identify opportunities to insert herself into our financial and social systems. When Michael and Sophia announced their engagement 8 months later, I was genuinely thrilled, but I now realize that even their engagement announcement had been strategically planned to maximize the benefits Sophia could extract from joining our family. "Eleanor, I know traditional etiquette says the bride's family should handle most of the wedding planning," Sophia had said during one of our many coffee dates. "But my mother passed away when I was in college, and my relationship with my stepmother has always been complicated. Would you be willing to help me navigate some of the bigger decisions? I'd love to have your guidance." I was deeply moved by her request. The idea that Sophia wanted me to step into a maternal role for her wedding planning felt like a tremendous honor, and I threw myself into helping her create the celebration of her dreams. But what I didn't understand was that Sophia's request for help with wedding planning wasn't about wanting maternal guidance. It was about gaining access to my financial resources and professional connections in a way that would seem like family bonding rather than exploitation. We spent weekends touring venues, tasting cakes, and meeting with photographers. Sophia seemed to genuinely value my opinions, often saying things like, "What do you think, Eleanor? You have such good taste," or "I trust your judgment completely. Which option do you prefer?" But looking back now, I can see that Sophia was using these planning sessions to establish patterns that would serve her later. She was training me to be available for whatever she needed, whenever she needed it, while positioning my help as essential to her happiness and success. More significantly, she was using the wedding planning process to introduce the idea that my financial contributions would be necessary to achieve the level of elegance and sophistication she wanted for their celebration. "Eleanor, "I've fallen in love with this photographer's work," she would say, showing me portfolios that featured weddings with budgets far beyond what Daniel and Sophia could afford on their own. "But I know it's probably outside our budget. Do you think there's any way we could make it work?" Or, "This florist creates the most incredible arrangements, but they're definitely a splurge. I hate to even mention it, but these flowers would make the wedding absolutely magical." Each of ye. These conversations was structured to make me feel like I was the solution to a problem that was preventing Sophia from having the wedding of her dreams. She never directly asked me for money, but she consistently presented situations where my financial assistance would transform their ordinary wedding into something extraordinary. The wedding itself was beautiful, an elegant affair at a luxury resort in the Hamptons with 180 guests, professional photography, and catering that cost more than many people's annual salaries. But my total contribution to their wedding was nearly $28,000, money I was happy to spend to help them start their marriage with the celebration they'd dreamed of. "Eleanor, I can never thank you enough for everything you've done," Sophia said, during the mother-son dance, pulling me aside for a private moment. "You've made this day absolutely perfect, and I'm so grateful to be joining your family." At the time, I felt like I was gaining a daughter rather than losing a son. Sophia seemed to appreciate everything I brought to their relationship, and I looked forward to years of close family bonds and shared experiences. But the transformation began almost immediately after they returned from their honeymoon in Europe. The honeymoon I had arranged and funded using my professional connections and $22,000 of my retirement savings. The changes started so gradually that I didn't recognize them as a coordinated campaign until much later. Sophia didn't suddenly become cold or hostile. That would have been too obvious and would have triggered Daniel's protective instincts. Instead, she began a systematic process of repositioning me from beloved family member to valuable resource, who needed to be managed rather than simply loved. The first shift came in how my visits to their apartment were framed and scheduled. During their engagement, I had an open invitation to drop by whenever I wanted, and Sophia always seemed genuinely happy to see me. After the wedding, my visits became appointments that needed to be scheduled in advance and confirmed closer to the date. "Eleanor, I love having you over. But with Daniel's new responsibilities at work and my business expansion, our schedule has become so unpredictable," Sophia explained during one of our phone conversations. "Would it be easier if we planned your visits a week or two ahead of time? That way I can make sure we're both here and can give you our full attention." This seemed reasonable on the surface. Daniel had indeed been promoted to a senior sales position that required more client meetings and travel. But what I didn't realize was that Sophia was creating a system where my access to my son had to be approved and coordinated through her. The second shift was more subtle, but ultimately more damaging. Sophia began reframing my personality traits and behaviors in ways that made them seem problematic rather than positive. My enthusiasm about their lives became overwhelming excitement that created pressure. My offers to help with household tasks became taking over in ways that made Sophia feel inadequate. My suggestions about activities or restaurants became having strong opinions that influenced their decision-making. "Eleanor, you know how much we appreciate your excitement about our new apartment," Sophia said during one visit where I'd spent considerable time admiring their furniture choices and asking about their decorating plans. "But sometimes it feels like you have such specific ideas about what we should do that it's hard to figure out what we actually want ourselves." "I'm sorry, dear. I didn't realize I was being pushy. I'm just excited to see how you're building your life together." "Oh, you're not being pushy at all. It's just that Daniel and I are still figuring out our own style as a couple, and when you have such clear preferences, it makes us second-guess our own instincts." This was the beginning of a pattern that would continue for the next 3 years. Sophia would present my normal family behaviors as problems that needed to be solved, while simultaneously reassuring me that she wasn't criticizing me personally. The real genius of this approach was that it made me responsible for managing her emotional comfort, rather than addressing any actual problems with my behavior. If I disagreed with her assessment, I was being defensive. If I tried to modify my behavior, I was confirming that I had indeed been problematic. The third shift involved gradually excluding me from activities and decisions while making the exclusion seem like it was for my own benefit. Eleanor, Daniel. And I are going to look at vacation rentals this weekend, but I know research can be really tiring, and you've been so busy with your volunteer work lately, Sophia would say. Why don't we handle the initial research, and then if we find something we like, we can bring you back to see it. Of course, they would never bring me back to see anything, and by the time their decisions were made, my input was no longer relevant or needed. Or, we're thinking about trying that new restaurant downtown, but I know you're not crazy about experimental cuisine, and their menu is pretty adventurous for people who prefer traditional food. Maybe we should wait until we find somewhere that would be more enjoyable for everyone? But they would go to the restaurant without me, and I would only learn about it later when Sophia posted Instagram photos of their spontaneous date night. This pattern extended to everything from home improvement decisions, too stressful for someone my age, to social events, too late and too crowded for someone who valued quiet evenings, to professional networking opportunities, too complicated, when they were trying to establish their own business relationships. Each exclusion was presented as consideration for my well-being, but the cumulative effect was that I became increasingly peripheral to their lives and decisions. What I didn't understand during this early period was that Sophia's systematic repositioning of our relationship wasn't just about establishing control. It was about setting up a business model that would allow her to monetize my professional expertise and industry connections while minimizing her obligations to acknowledge or compensate my contributions. 6 months after their wedding, Sophia's luxury lifestyle consulting business began to evolve in ways that should have alerted me to what was really happening. Her social media presence became more sophisticated and professional, featuring high-end travel content, exclusive restaurant experiences, and luxury lifestyle advice that positioned her as someone with insider access to premium experiences that weren't available to typical consumers. More significantly, she started accepting paying clients for travel planning services, offering to coordinate luxury experiences and secure upgrades and special arrangements that supposedly reflected her industry connections and insider knowledge. I've been getting so many requests for travel planning help, Sophia mentioned during a family dinner. People saw our honeymoon photos and want to know how we accessed such exclusive experiences. I'm thinking about expanding my consulting business to include luxury travel coordination. That sounds like a wonderful opportunity, I replied, genuinely pleased that their honeymoon had been inspiring to their friends and might lead to business growth for Sophia. What I didn't realize was that Sophia was essentially building her business model around my expertise and connections, while carefully avoiding any acknowledgement that her insider access actually came from her mother-in-law's 35 years of professional relationships in the travel industry. The pattern became clear over the following year as Sophia's business grew and became more sophisticated. She was charging clients between $3,000 and $12,000 to coordinate luxury travel experiences, and her success rate for securing upgrades, exclusive access, and special arrangements was remarkably high, because she was using my industry relationships to deliver services that would have been impossible for her to provide on her own. But what made this arrangement particularly insidious was how Sophia disguised her business use of my expertise as family activities and relationship building. "Eleanor, would you mind helping us coordinate a weekend getaway for my birthday?" Daniel would call to ask. "Sophia's been working so hard on her business, and I want to surprise her with something really special. I would throw myself into arranging a luxury weekend experience using my industry connections to secure premium accommodations, exclusive activities, and special arrangements that would make their celebration memorable. But what I discovered later was that these family celebrations were actually market research for Sophia's business. She would document every aspect of the experiences I arranged, the hotels, restaurants, activities, and special touches that made them luxurious and exclusive. She would photograph the accommodations, take notes about the service standards, and analyze the coordination required to deliver each element of the experience. Then she would use this research to create similar packages for her paying clients, replicating the experiences I had arranged while positioning herself as the expert who had designed and coordinated everything. The exclusive wine tastings I arranged for their Napa Valley birthday weekend became part of a $8,000 luxury package that Sophia sold to 4 different clients over the following year. The private yacht experience I coordinated for their anniversary celebration became a signature offering that she marketed to high-net-worth clients looking for unique ways to celebrate special occasions. I was essentially functioning as Sophia's unpaid research and development department, providing the expertise, connections, and coordination that made her luxury travel business possible, while she received all the credit and financial benefit for services that were only achievable through my professional relationships. As Sophia's business became more successful, the requests for my assistance became more frequent, more complex, and more obviously connected to her commercial activities. But she continued to present these requests as family needs or relationship-building opportunities, making it difficult for me to refuse without seeming selfish or unsupportive. "Eleanor, I have a potential client who's interested in a luxury experience in Martha's Vineyard," Sophia would say. "I was wondering if you might have any contacts who could arrange some exclusive access to private estates or special events. It would really help establish my credibility if I could offer something unique. How could I refuse to help my daughter-in-law build her business? How could I prioritize my own convenience over her professional success and financial security?" But what I began to realize was that my assistance wasn't just helping Sophia succeed. It was making her success completely dependent on my continued cooperation and expertise. She couldn't deliver the luxury experiences she was selling without access to my industry relationships and accumulated professional favors. This created a dynamic where Sophia needed to maintain our relationship and my willingness to help. But she also needed to position herself as the expert, rather than acknowledging that her success was based on my contributions. The solution she developed was to increase the frequency and significance of family bonding experiences that would keep me engaged and invested in their happiness while providing ongoing opportunities to utilize my expertise for her business purposes. These family trips became more elaborate and expensive over time, but they also became more obviously structured around Sophia's business needs rather than genuine family bonding. During our luxury weekend in the Hamptons, Sophia spent most of our time taking photos and videos for her social media content, meeting with potential clients who happened to be vacationing in the area, and researching local venues and experiences that she could later offer to her paying customers. Was funding and facilitating market research for Sophia's business, while being told that these trips were about celebrating our family relationships and creating memories together. The most revealing example of this pattern came during our Charleston Mother's Day weekend, which cost $11,000 and was supposedly designed to honor my importance to their family. Sophia spent the entire trip documenting Charleston's luxury offerings, photographing hotel suites, restaurant interiors, and exclusive tours, while taking extensive notes about pricing, availability, and coordination requirements. When I asked about her constant note-taking and photography, she explained that she was just passionate about travel and wanted to remember every detail of our special family time together. But 3 weeks after we returned from Charleston, Sophia launched a Southern luxury experience package for her clients, featuring exactly the hotels, restaurants, and activities I had arranged and funded for our Mother's Day celebration. She was charging clients $9,000 per couple for experiences that were essentially replicas of our family trip, using my professional connections to deliver services she presented as her own expertise. What made Sophia's exploitation of my expertise particularly sophisticated was how she used social media to create public documentation of her luxury lifestyle and travel experiences while carefully controlling the narrative about how these experiences were made possible. Sophia's Instagram account, and Sophia Luxe Life, had grown to over 45,000 followers during the first 2 years of her marriage to Daniel. Her content focused on accessible luxury, insider travel tips, and elevated lifestyle experiences, themes that resonated with followers who wanted to upgrade their own travel and entertainment choices but didn't know how to access premium experiences. But Sophia's version of accessible luxury relied heavily on my professional connections and financial support, though her followers had no way of knowing that. When Sophia posted photos of their first-class flights to Europe, luxurious hotel suites, and exclusive dining experiences, her followers saw evidence of someone who had mastered the art of luxury, travel, and could help them achieve similar experiences. What they didn't see was that every upgrade, every exclusive access arrangement, and every special service had been secured through my industry relationships and funded with my retirement savings. When Sophia shared posts about insider tips for securing hotel upgrades or how to access exclusive restaurant reservations, her followers saw valuable advice from someone who clearly understood how luxury hospitality worked. What they didn't see was that all of her insider knowledge actually came from watching me coordinate arrangements and listening to my explanations of how industry relationships and professional favors made certain experiences possible. When Sophia posted content about budget-friendly luxury travel hacks or affordable ways to experience 5-star service, her followers saw practical advice from someone who had figured out how to access premium experiences without paying premium prices. What they didn't see was that the budget-friendly aspects of her luxury experiences were only possible because I was absorbing the actual costs while she enjoyed the benefits. But perhaps most damaging was how Sophia used social media to position herself as the lifestyle expert who was responsible for all the positive experiences in her life, while subtly minimizing or completely ignoring my role and contributions. Sophia would post photos of herself at exclusive events with captions like, "Grateful for connections that open doors to incredible experiences. Hard work and relationship building really do pay off. Networking wins. Luxury lifestyle. Grateful." But the connections she was grateful for were my connections, secured through my 35 years of relationship building in the travel industry. She would share posts about luxury accommodations with captions like, "When you find the perfect balance of elegance and comfort. Sometimes splurging on experiences creates memories that last forever. Retreat yourself. Chaz, luxury, travel. Worth it." But the splurging was done with my money, and the perfect accommodations were secured through my professional relationships. She would post content about exclusive dining experiences with captions like, "Tonight's dinner was absolutely magical. There's something special about discovering hidden gems and insider experiences. Foodie. Exclusive dining. Living my best life." But the insider experiences were arranged through my restaurant industry contacts, and the hidden gems were establishments where I had maintained relationships for decades. Sophia had figured out how to monetize my expertise and financial support for her social media brand, while positioning herself as the sophisticated lifestyle expert who was responsible for accessing and coordinating all the luxury experiences she showcased. But perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of Sophia's manipulation was watching how it gradually transformed my relationship with Daniel himself. The loving, considerate son who had always treated me with respect and appreciation slowly became someone who saw me as a problem to be managed rather than a person to be valued. This transformation didn't happen overnight. Sophia was too smart to directly criticize me to Daniel or to demand that he choose between us. Instead, She used subtle techniques to gradually shift his perception of our relationship dynamics. The first technique was reframing normal family interactions as evidence of boundary problems that needed to be addressed. When I would call Daniel to check in or share news about my activities, Sophia would later comment to him about how sweet it was that I was so involved in his life, but suggest that the frequency of our contact might indicate that I was having trouble adjusting to his independence as he became more established in his career and marriage. "Daniel, your mom called 3 times this week," Sophia would say in a tone that suggested this was concerning rather than normal. "I hope she's not feeling too isolated in retirement. Maybe we should make sure she's developing her own social connections instead of depending on us for all her emotional support." When I would offer advice or suggestions about decisions they were making, Sophia would agree with me enthusiastically in the moment, but later tell Daniel that she worried I was taking over their decision-making process in ways that might prevent them from developing confidence in their own judgment. "Your mom has such strong opinions about everything," Sophia would say after I'd helped them research vacation options. "I appreciate her experience, but sometimes I feel like we don't get to figure things out for ourselves because she's already done all the research and has clear preferences about what we should choose." These conversations gradually convinced Daniel that my enthusiastic involvement in their lives was evidence of an unhealthy attachment that was preventing him and Sophia from establishing proper independence as a couple. The second technique was creating situations where Daniel had to choose between my preferences and Sophia's emotional needs, then positioning his choice as evidence of his commitment to their marriage. Sophia would agree to plans that included me, then later express anxiety or discomfort about those plans in ways that made Daniel feel responsible for protecting her emotional well-being. "Daniel, I know your mom is excited about helping us plan our anniversary celebration, but I'm feeling really overwhelmed by how many people have opinions about what we should do," Sophia would say, after we'd spent a successful afternoon researching romantic getaway options. "I want our anniversary to reflect our relationship and our preferences, not just what other people think would be nice." Daniel would then have to choose between moving forward with plans that excited me and protecting Sophia from feeling overwhelmed by my involvement. Increasingly, he chose to protect Sophia, which meant canceling plans with me or excluding me from activities I'd been looking forward to. "Mom, Sophia's feeling a little stressed about all the anniversary planning," Daniel would call to tell me. "We're going to handle the rest of the arrangements ourselves, but we'll definitely tell you all about it when we get back." Each time Daniel chose to prioritize Sophia's comfort over my inclusion, Sophia would reinforce his decision by praising his sensitivity to her needs and his commitment to protecting their relationship. "Thank you for understanding how I was feeling," she would tell him. "It means so much to me that you're willing to set boundaries when I need them. I feel so supported and protected when you prioritize our relationship like that." Over time, Daniel began to see excluding me from activities and decisions as evidence of his maturity and his commitment to his marriage, rather than as hurtful rejection of someone who loved him and wanted to be involved in his life. The third technique was the most damaging. Sophia began sharing concerns about my behavior and mental state that positioned me as someone who needed to be handled carefully rather than someone whose opinions and feelings should be respected. "Daniel, I'm a little worried about your mom," Sophia would say after visits where I'd seemed perfectly normal and happy. "She seems really lonely since she retired, and I think she might be depending on us for social interaction more than is healthy for someone her age." Or, "I hope your mom isn't developing memory problems. She asked me the same question about our vacation plans 3 times during our phone call yesterday, and she seemed confused about details we'd already discussed." These concerns were presented as caring observations from a daughter-in-law who wanted the best for me, but they had the effect of making Daniel view my normal behavior through a lens of worry and patronizing concern rather than respect and appreciation. When I would call to make plans or share exciting news, Daniel would respond with the kind of careful, patient tone people use with elderly relatives they're worried about, rather than the enthusiastic engagement he'd shown in our relationship for 35 years. "That's great, Mom," he would say, when I told him about a particularly interesting book club discussion. "I'm glad you're staying active and involved in things. Staying active and involved in things." As if reading and discussing literature with friends was evidence that I was successfully managing the challenges of aging rather than simply living a normal, engaged life. By the time Sophia was ready to execute her final manipulation, the fake business opportunity that would cost me $30,000 and lead to my abandonment at Newark Airport, Daniel had been completely conditioned to see me as someone whose needs were less important than Sophia's comfort, whose feelings were less valid than Sophia's emotional state, and whose role in their family was something to be managed rather than something to be valued. The son who had once called me his best friend and most trusted advisor had become someone who could abandon me at an airport without experiencing any guilt or concern for my well-being. And the most tragic part was that Daniel genuinely believed this transformation represented his growth as a husband and his commitment to putting his marriage first, rather than recognizing it as the result of 3 years of systematic manipulation by someone who had never intended to welcome me into their family, only to use me until my usefulness was exhausted. But what neither Sophia nor Daniel understood was that the woman they had systematically underestimated and marginalized had spent 35 years in a profession that required her to detect patterns, analyze behavior, and identify threats that others missed. And I had been watching, documenting, and analyzing their behavior far more carefully than they realized. The woman they thought they had successfully sidelined was about to demonstrate exactly what happens when you underestimate someone whose professional expertise involves understanding how complex systems work, and how to make those systems fail catastrophically when circumstances require decisive action. Sophia had made one crucial mistake in her 3-year campaign to control our family dynamics. She had assumed that I was exactly who I appeared to be on the surface, rather than investigating who I actually was underneath, and that assumption was about to cost them everything. Tomorrow, I'll tell you about the breaking point, the moment I discovered the true scope of their deception, and when I stopped protecting them from the consequences of their own choices. Because what they didn't know was that every luxury arrangement I had made for their European vacation could be canceled, transferred, or sold with a single phone call. And I was about to make a lot of phone calls. The woman they abandoned at Newark Airport was about to become their most expensive nightmare. And it was going to start the moment I got back to my car. Because when you spend 35 years learning how to make travel dreams come true, you also learn exactly how to make them disappear. And I was done making dreams come true for people who saw me as nothing more than a convenient resource to be exploited. Standing in that Newark Airport terminal, watching the departure board confirm that Daniel and Sophia's flight to London was boarding on schedule, I experienced something I hadn't felt since my most challenging crisis management cases during my corporate career. The cold, focused clarity that came with applying professional expertise to solve a problem that required immediate and decisive action. For 35 years, my job had been to make travel dreams come true for people who deserved exceptional experiences. But it had also been my job to protect clients from fraud, investigate suspicious travel arrangements, and implement consequences when people violated trust relationships or attempted to exploit the systems I managed. As I walked through the airport terminal toward the parking garage, I wasn't Eleanor Walsh, the abandoned grandmother who had just been conned out of $30,000. I was Eleanor Walsh, former senior vice president of global operations, who had just identified a clear case of fraud that required immediate professional response. Daniel and Sophia had made the catastrophic mistake of targeting someone whose expertise included not only creating luxury travel experiences, but also understanding every vulnerability in the international travel system. and how to exploit those vulnerabilities when people needed to learn expensive lessons about the consequences of theft and betrayal. But what they didn't understand was that the woman walking to her car in the Newark Airport parking garage had access to systems, relationships, and capabilities that could make their luxury European vacation disappear without a trace, starting with a few phone calls I was about to make before their plane even reached cruising altitude. I sat in my car for exactly 3 minutes, organizing my thoughts and developing a strategic response plan using the same methodologies I had employed for crisis management throughout my career. This wasn't about revenge. This was about implementing appropriate consequences for systematic fraud, while protecting my assets from further exploitation. My first call was to Jennifer Chen, my former assistant who had been promoted to Director of Client Relations at Premier Travel Consortium when I retired. Jennifer had worked with me for 12 years, and she understood both my professional capabilities and my ethical standards. More importantly, she had access to the same industry, networks, and emergency protocols that I had used throughout my career. "Eleanor, I wasn't expecting to hear from you today. Please tell me you're not calling because you're bored with retirement and want to come back to work full-time, because I have about 6 crisis situations right now that could use your expertise." "Jennifer, I'm calling because I need to implement emergency travel protocols for a fraud situation, and I need your help accessing the systems." Jennifer's tone immediately shifted from casual friendliness to professional concern. "Eleanor, are you saying someone has been targeting you for travel fraud? Because if that's what's happening, whoever is responsible has made a very serious mistake." "It's my son and daughter-in-law. They've just executed a $30,000 fraud scheme against me, and they're currently on a flight to London using arrangements I coordinated and funded under false pretenses. Eleanor, walk me through this from the beginning. But first, I want you to know that if family members are stupid enough to commit travel fraud against you, we're going to make sure they understand exactly what they've done wrong." I spent 15 minutes giving Jennifer a comprehensive briefing on Daniel and Sophia's systematic exploitation, the false business opportunity they had used to extract $30,000, and the luxury European itinerary I had arranged using my industry connections and financial resources. "Eleanor, what you're describing is textbook travel fraud with the added element of elder abuse. But here's what makes this situation particularly interesting from a professional standpoint. Your industry background means you have tools available for responding to this fraud that most victims don't have access to. That's exactly what I wanted to discuss with you. What are the protocols for emergency cancellation and asset recovery when travel arrangements have been secured under fraudulent pretenses? Eleanor, as long as you're acting to protect your own financial interests and you're using systems you're authorized to access, you have broad discretion to investigate and reverse arrangements that were obtained through deception. The fact that your professional background gives you more sophisticated tools than most people doesn't create any restrictions on your ability to use those tools defensively. Jennifer, I want them to understand exactly what they were stealing from and exactly what I'm capable of when I stop trying to protect them from the consequences of their own behavior. Eleanor, given your industry background and the evidence you've described, I think you're in a position to provide them with a very expensive education about the risks of travel fraud. Just make sure you document everything, because this case is going to be studied by industry professionals for years. My second call was to Marcus Rodriguez, Director of Fraud Prevention at Global Travel Security, a consortium of luxury travel providers that maintained shared databases of problematic clients, fraudulent bookings, and security risks. Marcus had worked with me on dozens of cases involving travel fraud, identity theft, and payment disputes, and he had the authority to implement industry-wide consequences that could affect someone's ability to access premium travel services across multiple companies and countries. Eleanor Chen, are you calling to tell me you've decided to come out of retirement and help us with the Henderson Industries case? Because that investigation is exactly the kind of complex fraud analysis that made you legendary in this industry. Marcus, I'm calling because I need to report a sophisticated case of travel fraud and implement immediate protective measures, but the perpetrators are family members and the situation is more complex than typical fraud cases. Eleanor, are you telling me that someone in your family has been stupid enough to try to commit travel fraud against you? Because that might be the worst judgment call in the history of white-collar crime. I walked Marcus through the evidence of Daniel and Sophia's systematic deception, the false pretenses they had used to extract luxury travel arrangements, and the $30,000 in financial fraud they had committed against me. Eleanor, what you're describing qualifies as organized travel fraud with elder abuse components. But here's what makes this case particularly significant. You have professional access to industry databases and fraud prevention systems that will allow you to implement consequences that go far beyond just recovering your immediate losses. What kind of consequences are we talking about? Eleanor, travel fraud creates industry-wide liability concerns. When someone uses false pretenses to secure luxury arrangements, every company involved in those arrangements becomes vulnerable to chargebacks, reputation damage, and regulatory scrutiny. We have protocols for implementing comprehensive travel restrictions that prevent fraudsters from accessing premium services across our entire network. How comprehensive are these restrictions? Eleanor, if someone is flagged in our fraud database for systematic deception and elder abuse, they become essentially unable to book luxury travel services with any of our partner companies. That includes airlines, hotels, cruise lines, car rental agencies, and tour operators across 6 continents. The restrictions remain in effect until the fraud charges are resolved and full restitution is made. Marcus, I want them to understand that travel fraud has consequences that extend far beyond the immediate financial impact. Eleanor, when this is over, Daniel and Sophia are going to understand exactly what happens when you target someone whose professional network includes fraud prevention specialists. They're also going to discover that luxury travel is a surprisingly small industry where reputation matters more than money. My third call was to Patricia Kim, senior partner at Morrison, Kim & Associates, the law firm that had handled my contract negotiations with Premier Travel Consortium for over 20 years. Patricia specialized in travel industry law and fraud prevention, and she had the expertise to ensure that my response to Daniel and Sophia's fraud would be legally sound and professionally appropriate. Eleanor, please tell me you're calling because you've decided to write a book about your travel industry career. I've been telling you for years that your crisis management stories would make an incredible memoir. Patricia, I'm calling because I need legal advice about travel fraud and elder abuse, but the situation involves family members and professional resources that create some complex considerations. Eleanor, are you telling me that someone has been stupid enough to try to commit travel fraud against you? Because that would represent such catastrophically poor judgment that I'm not sure how we would even calculate the potential consequences. Spent 20 minutes walking Patricia through the comprehensive evidence I had gathered about Daniel and Sophia's systematic exploitation, the financial analysis I was prepared to conduct, and the industry resources I was planning to deploy in response to their fraud. Eleanor, what you're describing is a textbook case of travel fraud with elder abuse elements. But what makes this situation legally fascinating is that your professional background gives you access to industry tools and databases that most fraud victims can't utilize. What are the legal boundaries around using my professional access to protect my own financial interests? Eleanor, you have broad legal authority to investigate fraud that's been committed against you and to implement protective measures using any systems you're legally authorized to access. The key is documentation and proportionality. You need to prove what they've done, and your response needs to be reasonable given the scope of their fraud. Patricia, when this is over, I want them to understand exactly what they were stealing from and exactly what consequences travel fraud can have when the victim has professional expertise and industry connections. Eleanor, given your background and the evidence you've described, you're in a position to provide them with a comprehensive education about travel industry fraud prevention. Just make sure you document everything according to federal evidence standards, because this case is going to become a landmark example of how industry professionals handle family-based fraud. By 2:30 p.m., while Daniel and Sophia were somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, believing they had successfully executed a $30,000 con game against a helpless elderly woman, I was sitting in my home office accessing the same fraud investigation and response systems I had used throughout my career to protect clients from exactly the kind of deception they had just committed against me. The first step was gaining secure access to the Premier Travel Consortium database, which maintained comprehensive records of all luxury travel arrangements coordinated through their network. As a retained consultant with security clearances, I had authorization to access these systems for fraud investigation purposes, and Daniel and Sophia's European vacation definitely qualified as a fraud investigation. I pulled up the complete booking record for their trip, which included detailed information about every flight, hotel reservation, restaurant booking, and special arrangement I had coordinated on their behalf. The total retail value of their itinerary was $67,000, but through my industry relationships and accumulated professional favors, I had secured everything for approximately $32,000 in actual costs that I had covered entirely with my own funds based on their false claims about a business opportunity. The booking records also included detailed contact information for every hotel, airline, and service provider involved in their arrangements, along with the specific authorization codes and professional relationship references I had used to secure their upgrades and special access. This was exactly the kind of comprehensive documentation that fraud investigators dream of having: complete records of fraudulent arrangements, clear evidence of false pretenses, and detailed contact information for every party involved in the fraudulent transactions. The second step was accessing the Global Travel Security Fraud database, which allowed industry professionals to flag suspicious bookings, problematic clients, and fraudulent arrangements for investigation and potential restriction. As a former senior executive with lifetime access privileges, I could input fraud alerts that would trigger automatic reviews of any future travel bookings associated with Daniel and Sophia's names, credit cards, or personal information. But more importantly, I could implement immediate holds on their current arrangements while fraud investigations were conducted, holds that would require them to provide additional documentation and financial guarantees before their reservations could be confirmed or services could be provided. The third step was preparing comprehensive evidence packages that documented the systematic nature of Daniel and Sophia's fraud, using the same analytical techniques I had employed throughout my career for complex fraud investigations. I created detailed timelines showing the relationship between their false statements to me and their actual activities, financial analyses documenting the scope of their deception, and evidence compilations that would allow attorneys or investigators to understand immediately what had been done and what consequences were appropriate. But the most important step was accessing the emergency response protocols that I had helped develop during my years managing crisis situations for high-priority corporate clients. These protocols allowed senior industry professionals to implement immediate protective measures when client safety, financial security, or company reputation was at risk. Daniel and Sophia had created exactly the kind of situation these protocols were designed to address: systematic fraud that posed ongoing risks to industry partners and required immediate intervention to prevent additional damage. At 3:15 p.m., I began implementing what would become the most comprehensive travel fraud response of my career. Using the same strategic planning methodologies I had employed for complex crisis management cases, I initiated a multi-phase approach that would address immediate protection, asset recovery, and long-term consequences. Phase 1 was immediate asset protection. I contacted every hotel involved in Daniel and Sophia's European itinerary and implemented fraud holds on their reservations, requiring additional verification and payment guarantees before their accommodations could be confirmed. This is Eleanor. Walsh from Premier Travel Consortium calling about a fraud investigation involving reservations that were secured under false pretenses. I explained to the general manager of the Savoy in London, someone I had worked with for over 15 years. I need to implement immediate holds on the bookings while we conduct our investigation. Eleanor, of course. What kind of fraud are we dealing with? Family members used false business claims to extract luxury arrangements that they had no intention of paying for. The reservations were secured using my professional relationships under fraudulent pretenses. We'll implement immediate holds and require verified payment before any services are provided. Do you need us to flag their names in our security system? Yes, and please coordinate with your partner properties in Paris and Rome. This is a systematic fraud case that affects multiple locations. Similar conversations with hotels in Paris and Rome resulted in comprehensive holds on all their luxury accommodations, meaning that Daniel and Sophia would arrive in Europe to discover that their confirmed reservations required additional payment and verification before any services could be provided. Phase 2 was airline coordination. I contacted British Airways Fraud Prevention Department and provided documentation showing that Daniel and Sophia's first-class tickets had been secured. Through false pretenses and elder abuse, Ms. Walsh, we show that you have senior industry status with authorization to book these arrangements, the fraud specialist explained. Are you reporting that the passengers used deception to obtain these bookings? Yes, they claimed this was a business trip requiring my professional coordination, but it's actually a personal vacation funded through fraud against an elderly family member. We'll flag their tickets for additional security screening and payment verification. If they can't provide documentation supporting their original booking claims, the tickets can be canceled and refunded to the original payment source. Phase 3 was implementing industry-wide fraud alerts. Using the Global Travel Security Database, I entered comprehensive information about Daniel and Sophia's fraudulent activities, creating permanent records that would trigger automatic reviews. If they attempted to book luxury travel services with any partner companies in the future. These fraud alerts included detailed descriptions of their deception methods, documentation of their false business claims, and evidence of their systematic exploitation of an elderly family member's professional relationships and financial resources. But Phase 4 was the most sophisticated element of my response. I began coordinating with industry colleagues to ensure that Daniel and Sophia's fraud would have comprehensive consequences that extended far beyond their immediate European vacation. Contacted colleagues at luxury hotel chains, premium cruise lines, high-end tour operators, and exclusive resort properties across North America and Europe, providing them with detailed information about Daniel and Sophia's fraud patterns and requesting that they implement preventive measures to protect themselves and other potential victims from similar deception. What Daniel and Sophia didn't understand was that the luxury travel industry operates largely on trust, professional relationships, and shared information about potential risks and problematic clients. When someone commits fraud against a senior industry professional, that information spreads quickly through networks that have been built over decades of collaboration and mutual protection. By 5 p.m., I had coordinated with fraud prevention specialists at 47 different luxury travel companies, all of whom agreed to implement monitoring and restriction protocols for Daniel and Sophia based on the evidence I had provided about their systematic deception and elder abuse. These restrictions would affect their ability to book luxury accommodations at premium hotels and resorts, secure upgrades or special arrangements through industry partnerships, access exclusive tours, experiences, and VIP services, obtain premium travel insurance or concierge services, utilize luxury travel planning services or personal travel coordinators. But more importantly, these restrictions would remain in effect indefinitely, creating a permanent record of their fraudulent activities that would follow them throughout their future travel experiences. The luxury travel industry has long memories and detailed databases. And Daniel and Sophia had just ensured that their names would be associated with fraud and elder abuse in systems that were accessed by travel professionals across 6 continents. Eleanor, I've never seen industry response this coordinated or this comprehensive, Jennifer Chen told me during our 6 p.m. check-in call. Your colleagues are treating this like a major fraud investigation because that's exactly what it is. What kind of immediate impact are we talking about? Eleanor, Daniel and Sophia are going to arrive in London to discover that their luxury European vacation has essentially evaporated. Their hotel reservations will require additional payment and verification. Their first-class return flights will need to be reconfirmed with documentation they can't provide. Any restaurant reservations or special experiences will be canceled, pending fraud investigation. And the long-term consequences? Eleanor, they've essentially been blacklisted from luxury travel services across our entire industry network. They can still book budget accommodations and economy flights, but anything requiring professional coordination or industry relationships is going to be impossible for them to access. Jennifer, I want them to understand that travel fraud has consequences that extend far beyond immediate financial impact. Eleanor, when this is over, they're going to understand that defrauding a senior travel industry executive is like committing banking fraud against the president of a major bank. The consequences follow you everywhere you go. But as satisfying as it was to implement professional consequences for Daniel and Sophia's fraud, the most difficult part of this experience was confronting the personal betrayal and deciding how to rebuild my relationship with my son, if that was even possible. Sitting in my home office that evening, surrounded by fraud investigation files and industry correspondence, I realized that my response to Daniel and Sophia's deception had forced me to confront some painful truths about our family dynamics and my own role in enabling their exploitation. For 3 years, I had accepted treatment that diminished my worth and minimized my contributions because I wanted to maintain family relationships and avoid conflict. I had allowed myself to be positioned as someone whose needs were less important than other people's convenience, whose feelings were less valid than other people's preferences, and whose expertise was less valuable than other people's assumptions. Had enabled Daniel and Sophia's exploitation by consistently prioritizing their comfort over my own dignity, their financial needs over my own security, and their relationship preferences over my own emotional well-being. But the process of building a fraud case against my own family members had forced me to analyze my own behavior patterns and recognize how I had contributed to a dynamic that made their systematic exploitation possible. Had been so focused on being the generous grandmother and supportive mother that I had failed to establish appropriate boundaries, demand reciprocal respect, or require acknowledgement of my contributions to their lifestyle and business success. Had treated Daniel and Sophia's comfort as more important than my own financial security, their convenience as more valuable than my own time and expertise, and their happiness as more significant than my own dignity and self-worth. The fraud investigation had revealed not only the scope of their deception, but also the extent to which I had been complicit in creating conditions that made their exploitation both possible and profitable. But what I also realized was that my professional response to their fraud represented more than just implementing appropriate consequences. It represented finally understanding and asserting my own value and capabilities. For the first time in 3 years, I had stopped trying to be the accommodating family member who absorbed whatever treatment other people chose to give me. And I had started being the experienced professional who demanded respect and implemented consequences when that respect was violated. I had stopped protecting Daniel and Sophia from the results of their own choices, and I had started protecting myself from people who saw my love and generosity as weaknesses to be exploited rather than gifts to be appreciated. While I was implementing comprehensive fraud responses from my home office in Connecticut, Daniel and Sophia were discovering that their luxury European vacation was about to become a very expensive education about the consequences of travel fraud. Their first indication that something was wrong came when they tried to check into the Savoy in London on Wednesday evening. Instead of the seamless VIP arrival experience they expected, they were informed that their reservation was under fraud investigation and required additional payment verification before any services could be provided. "I'm sorry, but we're going to need you to provide documentation supporting your original booking arrangements," the front desk manager explained. "There are some questions about the authorization used to secure your accommodations." "What kind of questions?" Sophia demanded. "We have confirmed reservations." The reservations were made using professional industry credentials that are now under investigation for fraudulent use. "We'll need you to provide payment guarantees and identity verification before we can confirm your accommodations." "This is ridiculous," Daniel said. "My mother arranged these reservations. There must be some kind of mistake." "Sir, the fraud report we received indicates that these arrangements were secured under false business pretenses involving elder abuse. We take these allegations very seriously." The phrase elder abuse hit Daniel like a physical blow. Whatever he had expected the consequences of their deception to be, having his mother's professional colleagues treat him like a criminal who had abused an elderly family member wasn't something he had anticipated. But the problems were just beginning. There. First-class return flights to New York required reconfirmation with British Airways. But when they tried to verify their tickets, they discovered that their reservations had been flagged for fraud investigation and needed additional documentation before travel could be approved. The exclusive restaurant reservations I had arranged through my hospitality industry contacts had been canceled, with restaurants reporting that the bookings had been secured under false pretenses and were no longer valid. The private tours and special experiences that were supposed to highlight their European vacation had been suspended, pending investigation of fraud allegations. Within 24 hours of arriving in London, Daniel and Sophia discovered that their luxury European vacation had essentially disappeared, replaced by a nightmare of fraud investigations, canceled reservations, and professional consequences that extended far beyond anything they had imagined possible. But perhaps most shocking was realizing that every problem they encountered traced back to the same source: their systematic exploitation of someone whose professional expertise and industry relationships they had consistently dismissed and underestimated. The woman they had abandoned at Newark Airport wasn't the helpless elderly victim they had assumed. They were targeting. She was Eleanor Walsh, Senior Vice President of Global Operations, and she had just provided them with a comprehensive education about exactly what happened when you committed travel fraud against someone whose job had been protecting the industry from people exactly like them. On Thursday evening, while Daniel and Sophia were huddled in a budget hotel in London trying to figure out why their luxury vacation had collapsed around them, my phone rang. It was Daniel, and for the first time in 3 years, his voice carried the kind of genuine panic and desperation that indicated he finally understood the magnitude of his mistake. "Mom, please, we need to talk. Something's wrong with all our travel arrangements, and everyone is saying there's been some kind of fraud investigation. I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Daniel, there's been no misunderstanding. You lied to me about the nature of your trip. You stole $30,000 from me through false pretenses, and you abandoned me at an airport when I needed your help. What you're experiencing now are the professional consequences of committing travel fraud against someone who spent 35 years learning how to prevent and investigate exactly the kind of deception you used against me." "Mom, we never meant—" "Daniel, you're going to listen to me very carefully, because this is the only conversation we're going to have about this situation until you and Sophia take responsibility for what you've done and make appropriate restitution. Mom, please, can we just— You abandoned your mother at an airport because helping me would have inconvenienced your luxury vacation. You lied to me for weeks about Rebecca's health while posting social media content from a resort vacation. You have systematically exploited my professional expertise and financial resources for 3 years, while treating me like disposable help whose feelings and needs didn't matter. Mom, we're sorry. We didn't realize. Daniel, you didn't realize. Because you never bothered to learn who I actually am or what I'm actually capable of. You assumed I was exactly what I appeared to be on the surface. A lonely, elderly woman who needed your guidance and would be grateful for whatever scraps of attention you were willing to provide. We know we made mistakes. Daniel, you didn't make mistakes. You committed systematic fraud against someone whose professional expertise includes detecting and stopping exactly the kind of fraudulent behavior you've been conducting for 3 years. You exploited someone whose job was understanding every aspect of the travel industry, including how to make luxury arrangements disappear when people violate trust relationships. There was a long silence on Daniel's end, and I could practically hear him processing the implications of what I was telling him. Mom, what do you want from us? How do we fix this? Daniel, you're going to return home immediately and reimburse me for every penny you've stolen, plus interest and penalties for the fraud charges. You're going to liquidate whatever assets you need to come up with $45,000 in cash within 30 days. Mom, we don't have that kind of money. Everything we have is tied up in business investments and living expenses. We can't. Then, you're going to sell whatever you need to sell and learn to live within your actual means instead of subsidizing your lifestyle through fraud and exploitation of family members. But what about Sophia's business? She's built up this client base and reputation. This will destroy everything she's worked for. Daniel, Sophia built her business by exploiting my expertise and professional relationships while lying about the source of her capabilities. She's been selling services that were only possible because of my industry connections, while taking full credit and payment for arrangements I coordinated and made possible. Mom, please, isn't there some way we can work this out? Some payment plan or arrangement that doesn't destroy our entire life? Daniel, you destroyed your entire life when you decided that stealing from me was easier than building honest success, based on your own capabilities. I'm just making the consequences visible. Mom, we'll pay you back, we'll do whatever you want, but please stop this fraud investigation. It's affecting everything: our credit, our business, our professional reputation. People are treating us like criminals. Daniel, you are criminals. You committed elder abuse and travel fraud against your own mother. The fact that your family members doesn't change the legal and professional reality of what you've done. Over the following week, as Daniel and Sophia struggled to navigate the comprehensive consequences of their fraud while dealing with canceled reservations, frozen accounts, and industry-wide restrictions on their travel capabilities, I developed a detailed plan for the restitution and accountability measures that would be required before I would consider ending the fraud investigation. The financial restitution was straightforward. Daniel and Sophia needed to repay the $30,000 they had stolen for their fake European business trip, plus the $22,000 I had spent on their honeymoon arrangements, plus interest and penalties that brought the total to $67,000. But the professional accountability requirements were more complex and more significant for their long-term consequences. Sophia needed to acknowledge publicly that her luxury travel business had been built on fraudulent representation of her capabilities and systematic exploitation of her mother-in-law's industry expertise. She needed to contact every client she had served and provide full disclosure about the actual source of the exclusive arrangements and special access she had been selling as her own expertise. She also needed to surrender the business relationships and professional credentials she had developed based on my industry connections, and rebuild her business model using only her own capabilities and resources. Daniel needed to acknowledge that his participation in systematic fraud against an elderly family member violated the ethical standards of his pharmaceutical sales position, and he needed to disclose the fraud charges to his employer and professional licensing boards. Both of them needed to complete comprehensive ethics training about elder abuse, fraud prevention, and professional conduct, and provide documentation of their compliance with these requirements. But perhaps most importantly, they needed to demonstrate genuine understanding of what they had done wrong and authentic commitment to rebuilding our family relationships based on respect, honesty, and reciprocal consideration rather than exploitation and manipulation. These aren't punitive measures, I explained to Patricia Kim during our legal consultation. These are accountability requirements that address the scope of their fraudulent activities and provide appropriate consequences for the professional and personal violations they committed. Eleanor, what you're proposing is proportional to the scope of their fraud and designed to prevent future exploitation. You're essentially requiring them to take responsibility for their actions and rebuild their lives based on honest capabilities rather than continued exploitation of your resources. Patricia, I want them to understand that fraud has consequences that extend beyond immediate financial impact. I want them to learn that professional relationships are built on trust and competence, not deception and manipulation. Eleanor, when this is over, Daniel and Sophia are going to understand exactly what they violated when they chose to exploit your trust and professional capabilities. They're also going to understand that recovery from fraud requires genuine accountability, not just financial restitution. Tomorrow, I'll tell you exactly what happened when Daniel and Sophia realized that their luxury lifestyle and business success had been completely dependent on exploiting someone whose professional expertise they had never bothered to understand or respect. And I'll reveal the final consequences that ensured they would never again mistake kindness for weakness or assume that age meant vulnerability. Because the woman they abandoned at Newark Airport had spent 35 years learning exactly how to make travel fraud as expensive and unforgettable as possible for the people who committed it. And Daniel and Sophia were about to discover that some lessons cost everything you think you have. Over the following 2 weeks, while Daniel and Sophia struggled to navigate the comprehensive consequences of their fraud, I watched their entire lifestyle structure collapse with the same professional detachment I had used throughout my career when observing the results of well-executed crisis management strategies. Their luxury European vacation had become a nightmare of budget accommodations, canceled reservations, and constant verification requirements that turned every interaction with service providers into a reminder of their fraudulent activities. They were learning firsthand what happened when someone's reputation in the travel industry was permanently damaged by documented fraud and elder abuse. But the immediate travel consequences were only the beginning of a much larger collapse that would reshape every aspect of their lives. Sophia's luxury lifestyle consulting business, which had generated over $150,000 in revenue during the previous year, essentially evaporated within 10 days of my fraud implementation. Her clients began receiving detailed information about the true source of her exclusive arrangements and insider access, along with documentation showing that her business model had been built on systematic exploitation of an elderly family member's professional relationships. I'm calling to inform you that the luxury travel arrangements Mrs. Martinez coordinated for your family vacation were actually secured through fraudulent use of my professional credentials. I explained to each of Sophia's clients during a series of carefully documented phone calls. The exclusive access and special arrangements you received were not the result of Mrs. Martinez's expertise or industry connections, but rather unauthorized use of my 35 years of professional relationships in the travel industry. The responses were immediate and comprehensive. Clients demanded full refunds for services that had been obtained through fraud. Business partners terminated their relationships with Sophia's company. Social media followers began questioning the authenticity of content that had apparently been built on deception and exploitation. But perhaps most damaging was the ripple effect through Sophia's professional network in the marketing and lifestyle consulting industries. Word spread quickly that her business success had been based on fraudulent representation of her capabilities, and other professionals began distancing themselves from someone whose professional ethics and business practices were now under scrutiny. Daniel's pharmaceutical sales career faced similar scrutiny when his employer learned about the fraud charges and elder abuse allegations. The pharmaceutical industry has strict ethical standards for sales representatives, and evidence of systematic deception and exploitation of elderly family members created immediate liability concerns for any company that employed him. Mr. Walsh, we've received information suggesting that you've been involved in fraudulent activities and elder abuse. his district manager explained during a meeting that would effectively end his pharmaceutical career. These allegations are inconsistent with our company's ethical standards and create potential regulatory and reputation risks that we cannot accept. Within 3 weeks of their return from London, Daniel had been terminated from his sales position. Sophia's business had lost all of its clients and professional partnerships, and they were facing comprehensive financial and professional consequences that extended far beyond the immediate travel fraud. But what made their situation particularly devastating was the realization that every aspect of their lifestyle and business success had been dependent on exploiting someone whose professional expertise they had never bothered to understand or respect. What Daniel and Sophia discovered during this period was that the luxury travel industry operates as an interconnected network where trust, professional relationships, and shared information about risks and problematic clients create systems of mutual protection that can be devastatingly effective when someone violates industry standards. My 47 industry colleagues had implemented fraud restrictions that affected not only Daniel and Sophia's immediate travel capabilities, but also their long-term access to luxury experiences, premium services, and professional travel coordination across multiple industries and geographic regions. These restrictions included luxury accommodation, blacklisting Daniel and Sophia's. Names were flagged in reservation systems at premium hotels, resorts, and vacation rental properties across North America, Europe, and Asia. Any attempt to book luxury accommodations would trigger fraud alerts, requiring additional verification and payment guarantees that they couldn't provide. Airlines and transportation restrictions. Their fraudulent use of professional travel credentials had been reported to airline fraud departments, creating permanent flags in their passenger profiles that would subject them to additional security screening and prevent them from accessing premium travel services, upgrades, or special arrangements. Exclusive experience prohibitions. Tour operators, exclusive restaurants, private clubs, and specialty service providers across 6 continents had been notified about their systematic deception and elder abuse, resulting in permanent restrictions on their ability to access the kind of exclusive experiences that had defined their luxury lifestyle. Professional travel coordination bans. Every luxury travel planning service, concierge company, and personal travel coordinator in the industry network had received detailed information about their fraud patterns, making it impossible for them to hire professionals to arrange the kind of sophisticated travel experiences they had become accustomed to enjoying. But perhaps most significantly, these restrictions were permanent and comprehensive, creating a travel industry reputation that would follow them for the rest of their lives. Eleanor, I've never seen industry response this coordinated or this thorough, Jennifer Chen told me during one of our weekly check-in calls. Your colleagues are treating this case like a landmark example of how to respond to travel fraud and elder abuse. What kind of long-term impact are we talking about? Eleanor, Daniel, and Sophia have essentially been blacklisted from luxury travel experiences across our entire global network. They can book budget accommodations and economy flights, but anything requiring professional coordination, industry relationships, or exclusive access is going to be impossible for them to obtain. And these restrictions are permanent? Eleanor, travel industry fraud flags remain active indefinitely. The only way to remove them is through comprehensive restitution, documented rehabilitation, and industry-wide review processes that typically take years to complete. Even then, their names will always be associated with elder abuse and systematic deception in our professional databases. Jennifer, I want them to understand that fraud has consequences that extend far beyond immediate financial impact. Eleanor, when this process is complete, Daniel and Sophia will understand that defrauding a senior travel industry executive creates professional consequences that affect every aspect of their future lifestyle and travel experiences. They've essentially ensured that they'll never again be able to access the kind of luxury experiences they built their identity around. As the comprehensive scope of the industry restrictions became clear, Daniel and Sophia were forced to confront the financial reality of their situation. Their luxury lifestyle and business income had been entirely dependent on exploiting my professional expertise and financial resources. And without access to those resources, they discovered that their actual earning capacity was insufficient to maintain even a fraction of their previous standard of living. Sophia's luxury lifestyle consulting business, which had generated $150,000 in annual revenue, had been completely dependent on my industry connections and professional relationships. Without access to those resources, she had no legitimate way to provide the exclusive arrangements and special access that her clients had been paying for. Daniel's pharmaceutical sales position had provided a solid middle-class income, but nothing approaching the financial resources required to fund the luxury travel experiences and high-end lifestyle choices they had become accustomed to enjoying through my subsidies and professional coordination. Their apartment lease, car, payments, credit card obligations, and lifestyle expenses had been structured around income levels that included substantial hidden subsidies from my financial contributions and professional services. Without those subsidies, they were facing immediate financial crisis that required drastic lifestyle adjustments and debt restructuring. But the most significant financial challenge was the comprehensive restitution requirements I had established as conditions for ending the fraud investigation and removing the industry restrictions that were preventing them from rebuilding their business and professional relationships. The total restitution amount was $78,000, which included $30,000 for the fraudulent European business, $22,000 for their honeymoon arrangements, $15,000 for 3 years of luxury family trips I had funded, and coordinated $8,000 in interest and penalties for the fraud charges, $3,000 in investigation and legal costs. But beyond the financial restitution, the accountability requirements I had established addressed the professional and ethical violations that had made their fraud possible. Public acknowledgement. Sophia needed to contact every client she had served and provide full disclosure about the fraudulent nature of her business model, including detailed explanations of how her exclusive arrangements had been obtained through unauthorized use of her mother-in-law's professional relationships. Professional disclosure. Daniel needed to inform current and potential employers about the fraud charges and elder abuse allegations, and provide documentation of his participation in comprehensive ethics training about professional conduct and elder care responsibilities. Business restructuring. Sophia needed to surrender all business relationships and professional credentials that had been developed through my industry connections and rebuild her consulting practice using only her own legitimate capabilities and resources. Ongoing monitoring. Both Daniel and Sophia needed to submit to regular financial and professional monitoring to ensure compliance with fraud prevention requirements and verify that they were not continuing to exploit elderly family members or other vulnerable individuals. These accountability measures aren't punitive, I explained to Patricia Kim during our final legal consultation. They're designed to address the systematic nature of their fraudulent activities and ensure that they develop the ethical standards and professional capabilities necessary to rebuild their lives honestly. Eleanor, what you've structured is proportional to the scope of their fraud and comprehensive enough to prevent future exploitation. You're essentially requiring them to take full responsibility for their actions and demonstrate genuine rehabilitation before the consequences can be removed. Patricia, I want them to understand that fraud and elder abuse have lasting consequences that can only be resolved through authentic accountability and demonstrated change in behavior. Eleanor, when this process is complete, Daniel and Sophia will have learned exactly what it costs to exploit trust relationships and professional capabilities. They'll also have learned that recovery from fraud requires genuine rehabilitation, not just financial restitution. What I observed over the following months was a gradual but fundamental transformation in Daniel and Sophia's understanding of our family dynamics, their own capabilities, and the consequences of exploiting trust relationships for personal and financial gain. The process began with Daniel's genuine recognition of what he had done wrong, and his first authentic attempts to take responsibility for the systematic fraud and elder abuse he had participated in for 3 years. "Mom, I need to tell you how sorry I am for what we did to you," Daniel said during our first real conversation after the fraud investigation had begun. "I've been thinking about everything that happened, and I realized that we didn't just steal money from you. We stole your expertise, your professional relationships, and your trust. We treated you like someone whose feelings and needs didn't matter, and we took advantage of your love for us in ways that were cruel and selfish. Daniel, I appreciate you acknowledging what happened, but I need to see genuine change in your behavior and attitudes, not just apologies. Mom, I know that. I've been working with a counselor who specializes in elder abuse and family dynamics, and I'm starting to understand how we justified treating you the way we did. I convinced myself that you enjoyed helping us and that the benefits you provided were just normal family support. But I realize now that we were systematically exploiting your generosity while giving nothing back. What are you planning to do differently?" "Mom, first we're going to pay back every penny we took from you, even if it means selling everything we own and starting over from nothing. But beyond that, I want to rebuild our relationship based on respect and reciprocity instead of exploitation. I want to get to know who you really are and what you've accomplished, instead of just assuming you're there to solve our problems whenever we need help." This conversation represented the beginning of a process that would take over a year to complete, but it marked the first time since his marriage to Sophia that Daniel had spoken to me as an equal, rather than as a resource to be managed. Sophia's transformation was more complicated and took longer to develop, partly because her entire professional identity had been built around the fraudulent business model she had developed using my expertise and connections. "Eleanor, I need to apologize for how I treated you and how I used your professional relationships without acknowledging what you were contributing to our success," Sophia said during a family meeting 6 months after the fraud investigation had begun. "I convinced myself that I was entitled to use your help because we were family, but I realize now that I was systematically stealing your expertise while taking credit for achievements that were only possible because of your professional capabilities. Sophia, I appreciate your acknowledgement, but I need to see evidence that you understand the scope of what you did wrong and that you're committed to rebuilding your professional life based on honest capabilities. Eleanor, I've contacted every client I worked with and provided full disclosure about how my services were actually delivered. Most of them demanded refunds, and my business essentially collapsed, but I know that was the right thing to do. I'm starting over with a much smaller consulting practice that focuses on marketing strategy rather than luxury travel coordination, and I'm building it using only my own skills and relationships. What have you learned from this experience? Eleanor, I've learned that professional success based on deception and exploitation isn't sustainable or ethical. I've also learned that I severely underestimated your expertise and professional accomplishments, and that I was wrong to assume that your willingness to help meant that I was entitled to unlimited access to your resources and relationships. These conversations, along with the comprehensive accountability measures they were completing, convinced me that Daniel and Sophia were finally developing genuine understanding of what they had done wrong and authentic commitment to rebuilding their lives based on honest capabilities rather than continued exploitation. Today, 3 years after the fraud investigation began, my relationship with Daniel and Sophia has evolved into something much healthier and more balanced than what existed during their years of systematic exploitation. Daniel has found employment as a medical device sales representative, earning significantly less than his previous pharmaceutical position, but building his career based on his own capabilities rather than exploiting family relationships. He's completed comprehensive ethics training, maintains regular financial monitoring, and has demonstrated consistent commitment to treating our family relationships with respect and reciprocity. Most importantly, he's learned to see me as a person whose expertise and accomplishments deserve recognition and appreciation, rather than as a resource to be utilized whenever convenient. Mom, I want to thank you for not giving up on me after everything I did wrong, Daniel told me during our most recent visit. I know it would have been easier to just cut off contact and move on with your life, but you chose to hold me accountable in ways that forced me to become a better person. Daniel, I love you too much to enable behavior that was destroying your character and our relationship. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop protecting them from the consequences of their own choices. I understand that now. I also understand that you're not just my mother. You're Eleanor Walsh, a professional who accomplished incredible things in her career and deserves to be treated with the respect and appreciation that those accomplishments warrant. Sophia has rebuilt her consulting business focusing on social media marketing and brand development, generating modest but sustainable income through services she can deliver using her own expertise. She's completed all the accountability requirements, maintains professional monitoring, and has demonstrated genuine commitment to ethical business practices. Perhaps more importantly, she's learned to treat our family relationships as genuine partnerships rather than opportunities for exploitation. Eleanor, I want you to know how grateful I am that you gave me the opportunity to learn from my mistakes and rebuild my life honestly, Sophia said during our last conversation. I know I hurt you deeply, and I know it took courage for you to hold me accountable instead of just cutting me out of your family. Sophia, I believe people can change when they're willing to take responsibility for their actions and do the work necessary to become better. You've demonstrated that commitment consistently over the past 3 years. Eleanor, I've also learned that you're not just Daniel's mother. You're a professional who accomplished things I never understood or appreciated. I'm grateful for the opportunity to build a relationship with you based on respect and reciprocity instead of exploitation. One of the most satisfying outcomes of this experience has been the professional recognition I've received from industry colleagues for my handling of a complex family fraud case that demonstrated best practices for responding to elder abuse and systematic exploitation. The case study developed from my response to Daniel and Sophia's fraud has been used by travel industry associations, fraud prevention organizations, and elder rights advocacy groups as an example of how professional expertise and industry relationships can be used effectively to protect victims and implement appropriate consequences for exploitative behavior. Eleanor, your case has become the gold standard for how industry professionals should respond to family-based fraud and elder abuse, Marcus Rodriguez told me during a recent industry conference. The comprehensive nature of your response, the coordination with industry colleagues, and the long-term accountability measures you implemented have created a model that's being studied by fraud prevention specialists across multiple industries. Marcus, I want other professionals to understand that elder abuse often involves sophisticated exploitation of professional relationships and industry expertise, and that victims with professional backgrounds have tools available for responding that can be more effective than traditional legal remedies. Eleanor, your case has demonstrated that industry networks and professional relationships can be powerful tools for implementing consequences that address both immediate fraud and long-term prevention. It's also shown that family relationships don't exempt people from professional accountability when they commit fraud and abuse. I've also returned to active consulting work with Premier Travel Consortium, taking on complex fraud investigations and elder abuse cases that utilize my expertise in family dynamics and professional exploitation patterns. My annual consulting income has increased to $95,000, and I'm working on cases that I find both professionally stimulating and personally meaningful. But perhaps most importantly, I've become involved in elder rights advocacy, serving on the board of the Connecticut Elder Protection Coalition and providing training for other elder abuse victims who want to understand their options for professional and legal response. Eleanor, your experience has helped us understand that elder abuse often involves much more sophisticated exploitation than most people realize, said Dr. Sarah Chen, director of the Elder Protection Coalition. Your case demonstrates that victims with professional expertise have unique capabilities for responding to abuse, but also that the exploitation of professional relationships creates complex psychological and emotional challenges that require specialized support. Sarah, I want other elder abuse victims to understand that they have more options for response than they might realize, and that professional expertise and industry relationships can be powerful tools for protecting themselves and implementing appropriate consequences for exploitative behavior. Eleanor, your advocacy work and professional consulting have helped dozens of other elder abuse victims develop effective responses to exploitation. You've shown that professional competence and industry expertise don't become irrelevant when someone retires. They become tools that can be used to protect yourself and others from people who exploit trust relationships. The most important lesson I learned from this experience wasn't about fraud prevention or professional networking. It was about the importance of understanding and asserting my own value and capabilities, regardless of whether other people recognized or appreciated those qualities. For 3 years, I had accepted treatment that diminished my worth because I wanted to maintain family relationships and avoid conflict. I had allowed myself to be positioned as someone whose expertise was less valuable than other people's assumptions, whose needs were less important than other people's convenience, and whose contributions were less significant than other people's entitlement. But the process of building a fraud case against Daniel and Sophia forced me to analyze my own behavior and recognize how I had enabled their exploitation by consistently prioritizing their comfort over my own dignity. The most difficult but most valuable insight was understanding that protecting relationships that require you to accept abuse isn't actually protecting anything worth preserving. Real family relationships are built on mutual respect, reciprocal consideration, and genuine appreciation for each person's contributions and capabilities. I also learned that professional expertise and industry relationships don't become irrelevant. When you retire, they become tools that can be used to protect yourself and others when circumstances require decisive action. The skills I had developed during 35 years of crisis management and fraud prevention didn't disappear when I left my corporate position. They remained available as resources that could be deployed when people chose to exploit my trust and generosity in ways that required professional response. But perhaps most importantly, I learned that age doesn't equal vulnerability, and that underestimating someone based on their apparent limitations is always a dangerous mistake. Daniel and Sophia spent 3 years assuming that I was exactly what I appeared to be on the surface. A lonely elderly woman who would accept whatever treatment they chose to give me because I was desperate to maintain access to my family. They never bothered to investigate who I actually was or what I was actually capable of when people pushed me too far. That assumption cost them everything they thought they had built, and taught them exactly what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness or assume that generosity equals gullibility. Today, 5 years after Daniel and Sophia abandoned me at Newark Airport, our family relationships have been rebuilt on foundations of respect, honesty, and reciprocal consideration rather than exploitation and manipulation. Daniel and Sophia completed their comprehensive restitution and accountability requirements 3 years ago, and the industry fraud restrictions were removed after they demonstrated genuine rehabilitation and ethical business practices. They've learned to live within their actual means, build professional success based on their own capabilities, and treat family relationships as partnerships rather than opportunities for exploitation. Most importantly, they've learned that trust, once violated, requires years of consistent behavior to rebuild. But that rebuilding is possible when people are willing to take genuine responsibility for their actions and commit to authentic change. My relationship with my grandchildren, Daniel and Sophia, now have 2 children, has developed into something much healthier than the exploitation-based dynamic that existed previously. I'm able to be the grandmother I want to be, providing love, wisdom, and special experiences without being taken for granted or treated like hired help. When Emma, now 8 years old, asks me about my work, I tell her about the exciting travel, experiences I helped create for people all over the world, and about the importance of building professional relationships based on trust and competence. When Jake, now 6, asks me why Mommy and Daddy had to learn hard lessons a few years ago, I explain that sometimes adults make choices that hurt other people, and when that happens, they have to take responsibility for fixing the problems they created. "But Grandma Eleanor," Emma said during our last visit, "you must have been really smart to do all that travel work and help all those people." "I was good at my job, sweetheart, and I worked very hard to help people have wonderful experiences. But the most important thing I learned was that you should never let people treat you badly just because you love them." "What do you mean?" Jake asked. "I mean that people who really love you will treat you with kindness and respect. And if they don't, you have to stand up for yourself and make sure they understand that their behavior isn't acceptable." "Like what you did with Mommy and Daddy?" Emma asked. "Exactly like what I did with Mommy and Daddy. Sometimes the people we love make mistakes, and when that happens, we have to help them learn to do better. The story of how my son's family left me at the airport and I sold their plane tickets isn't really a story about revenge or punishment. It's a story about what happens when people underestimate someone whose expertise they've been taking for granted, and about the importance of standing up for yourself when the people you love choose to treat you badly." Daniel and Sophia spent 3 years assuming that I would accept whatever treatment they chose to give me because I was desperate to maintain access to my family and terrified of being excluded from their lives. They assumed that my age and retirement status meant that I was powerless to respond to their exploitation in any meaningful way. They were wrong about everything. They were wrong about my professional capabilities, my industry relationships, my financial resources, and my willingness to implement consequences when people chose to abuse my trust and generosity. But most importantly, they were wrong about what my love actually meant. They thought my love meant that I would accept any treatment, overlook any behavior, and continue providing support regardless of how they chose to treat me. They thought unconditional love meant unconditional tolerance for exploitation and abuse. Real love means caring enough about people to stop enabling their destructive behavior, even when stopping that behavior is expensive and painful for everyone involved. Real love means refusing to subsidize choices that hurt other people, even when those people are family members you care about deeply. Real love means setting boundaries that protect your own well-being and dignity, even when other people prefer the version of you that accepts whatever they choose to give. The hardest lesson I learned from this experience is that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people is to stop protecting them from the consequences of their own choices. Daniel and Sophia needed to learn that actions have consequences, that trust has value, and that other people's feelings and needs matter as much as their own convenience and preferences. They needed to learn those lessons more than they needed my continued financial support and professional services. And I needed to learn that my value as a person wasn't dependent on other people's willingness to appreciate my contributions or treat me with respect. My value was inherent in who I am and what I'm capable of, regardless of whether other people recognized or acknowledged that value. The woman they left at Newark Airport wasn't someone who needed their permission to be valuable. She was Eleanor Catherine Walsh, Senior Vice President of Global Operations, who had spent 35 years learning exactly how to protect herself and others from people who exploited trust relationships for personal gain. And when she finally decided to stop protecting them from themselves, they learned exactly what they had been underestimating for 3 years. Today, when people ask me how I found the strength to implement such comprehensive consequences against my own family members, I tell them that it wasn't strength. It was professional competence applied to personal protection. And when they ask me whether I regret how severely I responded to their behavior, I tell them that my only regret is waiting 3 years to stop accepting treatment that was beneath my dignity and inconsistent with my value. The woman who was abandoned at the airport taught the people who abandoned her exactly what they lost. When they chose convenience over character, And that lesson changed everything, for all of us. Because sometimes, the most expensive education is the one that teaches you exactly what happens when you underestimate the wrong person. And my son and daughter-in-law learned that lesson in ways they'll never forget. Thank you for following Eleanor's incredible journey from victim to victor. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe for more stories about people who refuse to be underestimated, and share your own experiences with family manipulation in the comments below. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is refuse to be diminished by people who should be lifting us up.